To order. Welcome to meeting number 27 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance. Pursuant to the order of reference of Tuesday, March 24th, the committee is meeting on the government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Today's meeting is taking place by video conference, and the proceedings will be made available by the House of Commons website. I'll not go through the technicalities. I think we've been through them a number of times, but I would emphasize that the use of the headset with the boom microphone is highly recommended. It makes it an awful lot easier for those that are translating, and I'd ask people to speak slowly and clearly as they can. Before I turn to our witness, the Parliamentary Budget Officer, I do want to give MP Morantz a minute for an opening remark on the anniversary he casually mentioned a moment ago. Marty, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for giving me a moment. Today, my home province of Manitoba celebrates its 150th anniversary. It was on May 12, 1870. We officially became a province, the fifth to join Confederation. The resilience of our prairie spirit of over 1.3 million Manitobans has never been on display more than now, as Manitobans of all walks of life come together as we fight against COVID-19. Throughout these 150 years, Manitobans have persevered through tough times and celebrated the good times. Today and all days, I'm truly proud to be a Manitoban. Happy 150th anniversary in Manitoba. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Marty, and happy 150th from all us as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Then we will turn to the to our witnesses today from the Office of the Parliamentary Budget Officer, Yves Giroux, Parliamentary Budget Officer, and Ms. Yan, Director of Budgetary Analysis with the PBO. Parliamentary Officer, you're on. I assume you have an opening statement, and we'll go from there.
Yes, I do, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Vice Chairs, and members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to appear before you today, our first virtual appearance before this committee. We are pleased to be here today to discuss our recent COVID-19 economic and fiscal analysis. With me today, I have Dr. Shawi Yan, who's Director of Budgetary Analysis in my office. Our work to date has included the publication of 3 scenario analysis reports on the impact of COVID-19 pandemic and oil price shocks. Our scenario analysis reports are designed to help parliamentarians gauge the potential implications of the COVID-19 pandemic and oil price shocks on the Canadian economy and the government's finances. The analysis provides a plausible illustrative scenario. It is not a forecast. The scenario analysis is updated regularly as more data and information become available. Our latest scenario analysis update report, which was published on April 30th, incorporates new federal measures announced up to and including April 24th. Our updated economic scenario assumes real GDP in Canada to decline by 12% in 2020, which would be the worst on record since the series started in 1961. Under this scenario, the budget deficit would increase to $252 billion in 2020-21, which would make it, relative to the size of the Canadian economy, at 12.7% of GDP. The federal debt to GDP ratio would rise to 48.4% of GDP in 2020-21. The latest fiscal results include $146 billion in federal budgetary measures that have been announced as of April 24th, based on Finance Canada and PBO cost estimates. These numbers do not take into consideration measures announced after April 24th. Their inclusion would increase the federal deficit by a few $billions. My office has also produced independent cost estimates of a number of the components of the government's COVID-19 economic response plan, including the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, and the Canada Emergency Business Account, among others. Based on our analysis, the estimated cost of the Canada Emergency Response Benefit is $35 billion, while the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy is expected to cost $75 billion, and the Canada Emergency Business Account just over $9 billion. To date, budgetary measures announced by the government are intended to be temporary. Once the budgetary measures expire and the economy recovers, the federal debt to GDP ratio should stabilize. However, if some of the measures are extended or made permanent, the federal debt ratio could keep rising. Shawi and I would be pleased to respond to any questions you may have regarding our COVID-19 analysis or other PBO work. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Giroux, and thank you for the important work that you do. I'll go through the list and then come back to the first questioner. The first up will be in the 6-minute round will be Mr. Morantz, then Mr. Fraser, Mr. St. Marie, Mr. Julian, and then on to Mr. Polyev in the next round. Marty, you're on.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair, and hello, Mr. Giroux. I want to ask you, and you'd mentioned in your opening remarks, and you've reported earlier about the $252 billion forecast deficit, which is, an historic number. It's my recollection across my lifetime is it's never been higher than around $40 billion before. But I'm just wondering if you have an analysis of what portion of that deficit would be attributable to the expenditures and the retraction in the economy directly related to COVID, and what portion would have been incurred in the ordinary course. In other words, if this hadn't happened, what would your forecast? This COVID crisis had not happened, what would your deficit forecast have been for 2021?
Sure. So we estimate that the economic downturn itself is responsible for about $70 billion in declines, in revenue declines. So of the 252, about $70 billion is due to reduced revenues. 146 is due to increased expenditures directly related to COVID-19. And we had already expected a deficit. I'm trying to go through my numbers here. And okay, so before COVID-19, we expected the deficit to be $23 billion in 2020-21. So we'll be very likely going from 23 billion to well over 250. And the components, the various components are, as I mentioned, so 23 billion of deficit, 146 budgetary measures, and about $70 billion in reduced expenditures.
Yeah, thank you. And I know that yesterday there were some news reports. It appears that some public servants have been asked to essentially ignore evidence of fraud in some of these programs. At this point in time, that seems to be what's been alleged, at least in the media. Given the staggering number that you just talked about, essentially a 10-fold increase in the deficit, do these reports concern you from your perspective as the PBO?
Well, it's certain that it's concerning to me, not only as PBO, but as a taxpayer, when I hear that there's a possibility that fraud or abuse in government benefits would not be countered or would not be closely monitored. That being said, in our cost estimates, we don't factor in fraud or abuse of systems. We make assumptions as to the number of individuals who would be eligible for these benefits under various assumptions, but we don't top up our estimates to take into consideration abuse or fraud.
So in simple terms, the deficit could be higher if these allegations are in fact correct.
Sadly, yes. If there is widespread fraud or abuse of these benefits, the expenditures will be commensurately higher.
Okay, good. Thanks for that. Just on the operating budget side, in 2019, the debt servicing costs in the operating budget were about $23.3 billion. Assuming that your numbers are accurate and there's no real increase for fraud, so we go with a $252 billion number, what do you expect the actual increase in the cost of debt servicing will be drawn against the operating budget?
So assuming that we indeed have a deficit of about $250 billion, we anticipate that debt charges will not go up, which is surprising and counterintuitive. But it's due to the fact that interest rates are so much lower than what we anticipated them to be just 2 or 3 months ago. So with interest rates being so low, it doesn't cost that much to finance that growing debt. So for example, the government can issue 10-year bonds and pay less than 1% in interest rates, which are levels that we have rarely seen in our lifetime. And we don't anticipate these interest rates to rise significantly over the coming months, due to the poor economic conditions.
And Mr. Chair, if I have time for one more, just on the deficits, we had heard reports in the past that the federal government might not have the budget back in balance until around 2040. Based on what's happened, and again, this is a whole new world. What's your sense of when the federal government might actually be in a position to bring the budget back into balance? How many years?
Well, your guess is probably as good as mine when it comes to that, because with a deficit of that magnitude, it will very likely require significant efforts for the budget to return to balance. It would require letting the programs that are temporary, letting them expire, but also probably having a strict control on expenditures or other kinds of policy actions such as tax increases, unless we're blessed and we witness unprecedented growth coming out of the pandemic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
No? You're a little over, but that's fine, Marty.
Right, okay.
Thank you both. Then turning to Mr. Fraser and on to Mr. St. Marie. Sean?
Thank you very much for joining us today and for your thoughtful analysis. As always, I want to pick up on a line of questioning, or line of answers, I should say, to one of Mr. Morant's questions about the carrying cost of this debt. You've indicated essentially that the cost of carrying this is not likely to increase. Is it because a decrease in the rate of interest being paid on any monies that are borrowed is lower than it was previously, or is it just that it was so low to begin with that more or less the cost of borrowing is so close to zero that it doesn't impact the overall number?
It's a mix of both. Historically, interest rates have been higher than what we have seen in the last several years. So even before the pandemic started, the government could borrow at very low interest rates. The pandemic has pushed these rates to even lower levels, which very few people thought would be possible, but it did happen. So the government can now finance its debt, the new borrowings, as well as debt that is maturing and has to be refinanced at very, very low rates, which are below 1% for 10-year bonds and barely around 1% or above 1% for 30-year maturities. So it's a combination of already low interest rates before the pandemic and even lower rates since the outset of the pandemic.
Well, the reason I ask is because one of the last times you joined us, we were in the flesh at committee, and it was following your late February report on the sustainability of federal and provincial finances. I believe one of the lines of questioning that I got into at the time involved the cost of borrowing on 30-year bonds. I think are referred to at 0.709% or something in that order. And one of the things that you indicated to us during your testimony was that there was essentially about $38 billion worth of, I hesitate to call it wiggle room, but spending or reduced taxes before the fiscal picture would become unsustainable. Is it your view that because there was such a wide gap between the existing expenditure plans and that sort of cap on sustainability, that once the economy stabilizes, despite this additional $252 billion in public debt, we will be able to continue to operate sustainably?
It is quite possible that once the pandemic is over and we return to what will be the new normal, that the finances of the nation will still be sustainable. That being said, it's very difficult to say that with a high level of certainty at this point because we don't know yet what the new normal will look like. We don't know when the new normal will be. And we don't know, the most important thing is, we don't know what the level of government expenditures will be necessary once we cross that awful divide, that awful gap that is COVID-19. So depending on what the world looks like when we have finally crossed that bridge and we have returned to the new normal, it may well be that government finances are sustainable if we are able to return to
excellent, thank you. One of the points that the former governor of the Bank of Canada made, actually it was Kevin Milligan, an economist who joined our panel. One of the points that he made during his testimony was that it's not government expenditures that have created this debt, but in fact the virus itself that has, we had a choice to make as to whether we would let private individuals, businesses, municipal, provincial, or federal governments bear the cost of the response. I thought that was an interesting way of putting it because a choice not to respond obviously would have come at an enormous cost as well, and largely would have downloaded that cost onto private individuals or other levels of government or businesses. I'm curious if you have the ability to analyze what the cost of a more limited intervention would have been across our economic system in Canada.
That's a very interesting question. We have not modeled the cost of not intervening or not supporting businesses and individuals to the same level, but it's something that would certainly be of great intellectual benefit to me and many economists and policymakers in the country. I'm not sure, however, how precise such an exercise would be because of the unprecedented nature of the current shock. It would be very difficult to determine what would be the impact of a lower level of intervention or different types of intervention, given that we're navigating in very uncharted territory.
Thank you.
Time for a very short one, John, if you have a short
Okay, I'll
one.
squeeze one last one in. I just want to put in perspective the total cost of the expenditures that we're putting out there. Obviously, they're substantial. I think Canadians appreciate that. But after the debt is incurred to pay for these expenditures, where does that put our debt to GDP ratio compared to historic highs? Are we in the territory of breaking any records here?
Well, assuming that 2021 is the only year where we have a deficit, which is far from being certain, we would have a debt to GDP ratio of 48%, which is still some percentage points away from the record that was reached in the mid-1990s, where it was 66.6% of GDP. And you may remember that at that time, the Wall Street Journal deemed Canada to be an honorary member of the third world. So we're far from that, but it wouldn't take that many more years of deficits of that magnitude for Canada to reach that level of debt to GDP.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both very much. Turning to Mr. St. Marie and then on to Mr. Julian. Gabriel?
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Donc, bonjour.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Mr. Giroux. First of all, I want to congratulate you for the excellent work you're doing in this crisis period, considering the number of publications. You seem like you're working a lot, and congratulations on that. We have seen the PNB relationship, the GDP relationship, rather, and we hope that there is a solution concerning the fiscal imbalance. So I would like to ask you a question relating to the accounting of loans. Some $250 billion have been spent in loans. It seems we have an unlimited roof above us, and all of these loans will have to be eliminated in 10 years. So according to your team, can we have a better control on what is being done now as to these loans? Excellent question, and a question that was asked in the previous Parliament as to the practice of government of giving loans and then having to cancel some of these loans because of the bankruptcy of the borrower. And so that means that some parliamentarians never get to vote on these loans. So there is the issue of the level of control as to the elimination of these debts. We would have to enable parliamentarians for voting on the maximum debt that a government can issue, because, as you know, in many cases there are net benefits for the Crown, so the government could actually make money if the interest rates are positive. But as we saw with Chrysler, when there is cancellation of debt, there is a cancellation of debt that isn't approved by parliamentarian. So a mechanism through which parliamentarians and senators could vote on the appropriateness of debt would be probably positive. All right, thank you. And I've noted that, yes, it was $2.5 billion for Chrysler some 2 years ago. That's worrisome. What do you evaluate the total cost of measures, but you don't have a detailed follow-up? So how much money is actually spent? Who are the businesses who get the emergency credit that was announced yesterday? We would like to get aggregates, at least, to see whether it's small businesses or large who are getting most of that money. Do you think that could be done? Because as parliamentarians, we don't have all the tools to exercise proper control and to see if, considering how immense these expenditures are, we are giving them to the deserving clients. Excellent question. I have sent some 20 requests for information to various departments, and so we have asked for accounts on a monthly or weekly basis or bi-weekly basis to know at what speed these funds are expended, at what speed they are actually being used by Canadians and by businesses, so that we can make a follow-up that can be helpful to you over the coming months. So we've already thought about that, and we seem to be getting excellent cooperation from departments, though we haven't received responses from most departments yet, but I'm pretty sure they will be giving us the information so that my office and myself could inform parliamentarians as to the situation. Well, I'm delighted to hear that. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing your future analysis. From the beginning of the crisis, you have worked at analyzing each measure as it is being announced and reevaluated to analyze the government's intervention. Would it be useful to see in a budgetary update all of these measures put together? I probably have two responses to this. It is very obvious to me that the government should present an economic update or a fiscal update, which is difficult in a situation of high uncertainty. But that fiscal update could tell us what the government expects as revenue and as expenditures throughout the crisis and for the coming months. That's very important for parliamentarians and for Canadians. The second part of my answer might sound a bit cynical. If the government doesn't want to do this, I'd be delighted to do it with the limited information I have, and that would allow me just the same to inform parliamentarians and Canadians, maybe not with as acute information as I could if the figures were to come from government, but I could reasonably inform you. And the absence of figures from the government sort of highlights my work even more up to a point.
Turning to Mr. Julian, and after him, we'll go to 5-minute rounds. I think we got lots of time. We'll go to 5. Mr. Polyev after that. Peter?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks very much, Monsieur Giroux, for being here again, virtually this time with Finance Committee. You've been very generous with your time with us, and we certainly hope that your family is safe and healthy, as well as the families of everybody working for the Parliamentary Budget Office. You play an important role in our Parliament. My first question to you is very simple. You've talked about the debt to GDP ratio coming out of the pandemic, or what we hope will be the rebuilding phase out of the pandemic. What does that debt to GDP ratio, how does that compare with the level that we had after the Second World War, which also was a period of intense spending and rebuilding our infrastructure and building a social safety net? And how does it compare with other countries that have a strong social safety net in place?
So it compares favorably to what we had as a country coming out of the Second World War. However, comparisons with World War II have to be taken with a grain of salt, because the system of national accounts was different back then. In the 1940s, we didn't talk about GDP, gross domestic product. We talked about gross national product, which took into consideration the production of Canadians, regardless of where they were in the world. So that's one difference compared to the GDP, which takes into consideration production in the physical boundaries of Canada. So there were differences, but by and large, we're far lower than we were coming out of World War II. Compared to other countries that have reasonable safety nets, G7 countries are a good point of comparison, and we are probably the lowest or the second lowest We have the second lowest debt to GDP ratio of the G7. There are countries such as the US that are close to or above 100%, Japan, which is above 200%, which I sincerely hope we don't get to. But we are probably, we're in a very good position when we compare ourselves to our international competitors, Italy, Japan, as I mentioned, France. Germany is probably in a very good position, but the UK and the US have higher debt to GDP levels than we do.
Thank you for that, because I think obviously there is going to be some pressure from Bay Street to push austerity models, and we're seeing many people, of course, who are just struggling to make ends meet. So the idea of austerity following coming out of the pandemic just does not make any sense. Now, you have actually traced, I think, a possible path coming out of the pandemic, and that's with your landmark report from last year. You'll recall coming in the final day of our last Parliament on June 21st, you presented, which was a landmark report, preliminary findings on international taxation, talking about the impact of international tax havens on taxes in Canada. In the conclusion, you said it would represent, if we include electronic funds transfers, approximately $168 billion in taxable income, $25 billion of tax revenues lost. And so I would ask, since that time, have you been able to see additional figures? And I guess my question is, you said at the time, on June 21st, that this was a relatively conservative estimate. Do you have an idea now of the upper threshold of the kinds of tax revenues that are the monies that we have in common to make investments in programs and jobs? How much of that is actually not part of what the federal government should be collecting?
So we did build a bit on that work since then, notably in response to requests from various political parties during the electoral campaign to cost various measures to combat tax evasion or to tax web giants that have income that they repatriate to their home countries or to their head office countries, which are often in tax havens. So we haven't built up or refined the estimate of $25 billion that was mentioned in our report of last June, but we have refined our understanding of various types of, I would say, aggressive tax planning, and in some cases, tax evasion and tax avoidance. So it's unfortunate that I cannot provide you an updated number to that $25 billion. But what I can tell you is that we have a much better understanding than we had then. And we are also having a much better understanding of the high net worth individuals and the various types of arrangements that they enter into to minimize their tax bills. For example, we have a report that's in the making about high net worth individuals and the spread, not the spread, but how wealth is reparti or scattered or attributed by income level. I'm at a loss for words. So we have a report in the making that will outline the share of wealth held by various types of families. So showing that, unsurprisingly, a very high proportion of net wealth is held by a small fraction of the population. So we are refining our understanding of the whole phenomenon of tax avoidance and tax evasion.
Just quick question. When would that report be made available? Do you have a target date at this point?
I'll refer you to Dr. Yan. She has a much better handle than me on the state of readiness of that report.
Dr. Yan, we've got all kinds of time. We're over, but go ahead, Dr. Yan.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to respond to this question. The report is recently finished. It's in a good shape. It should be available to the parliamentarians pretty soon in the near future. And that's my view. And I would advise Mr. Giroux accordingly, exactly how much time we're going to need from today until it's further release. my personal view after managing this project is that it's very close to the finishing line.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to 6 minutes the next round because we do have lots of time for this session. We'll start with Mr. Poilievre and then on to Mr. Fragiskatis. But before I go there, I've been thinking about in the first round under questions from Mr. Morantz over the concern of that's been raised both in Parliament and with the Prime Minister of the bureaucracy or government not going after those that maybe shouldn't be getting the curb. And I really want to be strong on this point. Fraud will not be tolerated. It's that simple. Fraud will not be tolerated. The ministers weren't as clear as they should have been, in my view, today. I have lots of people calling my office who were on EI, went back to work, but they automatically get transferred to CURB, so they get the $2,000 from CURB. They've called my office. What should they do? I tell them, set the money aside. It'll sort it out at the end of the season on income tax time, but don't spend it. They know they shouldn't have got it, and there may be some out there who are taking advantage of CURB. And the fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, these people are going to be picked up on by CRA or somebody else. So I want to emphasize fraud will not be tolerated, and I think parliamentarians will certainly push that. It will be addressed. On to you, Pierre. 6 minutes we'll go to. Pierre, you there?
Thank you. I took a look at the government's balance sheet today, and it was for the year 2018-19. It showed that the government of Canada has a negative net worth of $685 billion. That was before the coronavirus. According to the updates you've provided, Parliamentary Budget Officer, it's now $968 billion by the end of the year. We call it the federal debt. What it actually is assets minus liabilities, which typically we would call the net worth. So how is it possible for any entity to have a negative net worth of $1 trillion, $968 billion? The answer is that the major asset of the federal government is not on its balance sheet, which is taxation power. So when we ask whether or not the government can afford to pay its bills, the major question we need to consider is whether the population can afford to pay the government. And that's why I find, frankly, your and other officials' reference to our debt to GDP ratio as being so deceptive. Our debt to GDP ratio for this year is not 48%. It's somewhere closer to 360%. Because the federal government does not have a claim on the entire economy. That economy has to support the debt of federal, provincial, municipal governments, plus corporations, plus households. And when you add all of that together, we were at 356% of GDP back in 2018 before the coronavirus struck. So you've said that we have all this room to spend before we reach the 1995 levels of near bankruptcy. But I want to ask then, what was the total economy-wide debt to GDP in 1995 as compared to today?
So that number would have to take into consideration the provincial debt as well as municipal and other public bodies debt, such as school boards, hospitals, and so on. I don't have that number where it was in 1995-96, but I suspect it was probably way above 100% of GDP. We could get back to you with that level of debt if you want. But for sure, it was much higher than just the federal debt.
Yes, but it's not just the other levels of government, it's households as well. I'm reading from Dr. Jack Mintz in the Financial Post. According to the IMF, our private and public debt, including all financial instruments, was 356% of GDP in 2018. Not far off its 1995 peak of 378% of GDP when we faced a crisis selling our public debt to international markets. Now, my point here is that we're not, miles away from the 1995 crisis levels. We're only roughly 20 percentage points of GDP, all of government all public and private debt included. And with this year, the federal government alone will add 12% of GDP to its debt. God knows how much households are adding, and God knows how much the provinces and corporations are adding. Given that we have one economy that has to service all of this debt, are you not concerned that in the next several years we could hit a wall?
Well, when you add to the mix private debt or debt held by households and companies, it sure paints a very different picture. And we and the Bank of Canada governor and policy wonks and think tanks have mentioned repeatedly that it is a risk. The high level of debt that households have is presenting with a significant risk for the Canadian economy. That high level of debt, however worrying it doesn't cost that much to service, which is probably the cause of that high level of debt. In good part, it doesn't cost that much to pay a mortgage or to incur a huge mortgage, because interest rates on mortgages are 3%, 3.5%, 4%. So it incentivizes people to take on more debt, and they are doing that. So of course, when you take into consideration the debt that private individuals and corporations have, and you add that to the level of debt of governments, it is a very important amount. But I'm not sure what the government can do to prevent households from having that debt. It paints a worrying picture when you add them all together. It is true.
You have to add it all together because the government does not own the entire economy, so it cannot lay claim to all of the output in order to service its debt. That one economy has to service the debt of households, businesses, and all levels of government. And you're telling me the only saving grace we have right now is low interest rates. You've predicted that rates will remain low because the economy will be weak. But we have historical evidence that rates can be high in a weak economy. In the early 80s, we had an extremely weak economy, and we had extremely high interest rates at the same time to combat out of control inflation. Why would we risk that repeat? Why would we risk the possibility that we'd have unsustainable level of debts going into future increases in interest rates, all on the flowery assumption that rates will never go up again?
I don't think anybody is taking for granted that rates will never go up. The scenario that we've released goes only into the end of the current calendar year, and we don't anticipate a return to high interest rates. Those that have dared to put out projections or scenarios beyond the current fiscal year or calendar year are not envisioning a return to the high interest rates of the 1980s. But could interest rates go up in the next several years? Yeah, they could well go up. And that's something that we have to be cognizant of.
Chair, could I just make a closing 10-second comment on that?
You can, and we will have time for another question from you later on anyway, but if you want to go in now or have it later.
I'll make it very quick. I just point out that if, for example, the overnight lending rate were to go up to 2%, that would actually be an 800% increase over the 0.25% we have now. It would be only a 2-point increase, but it would be going up 8 times. And so the sensitivity of our economy to higher interest rates is so much bigger now, and therefore the risk is so much bigger as well.
Okay. Any comment you want to make on that, Mr. Giroux?
Only that I agree that our economy, the entire economy, is very sensitive to interest rates. And as Mr. Poilievre mentioned, should interest rates start going up, the government would have to incur significantly higher debt servicing costs, but households and companies would have to face much higher debt servicing costs as well.
Well, it's probably the only one on here that had to pay 22.5% in the 1980s. I remember it very, very well and very, very painfully. Turning to Mr. Fragiskatis, and then we'll go on to Mr. Cummings. Elizabeth May, somebody informed me that you had your hand up earlier. We will give you a round a little later on. Mr. Fragiskatis.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Giroux, for your testimony today and for all the work that you're doing. I want to follow up actually on some of the questions that Mr. Poilievre posed. You've been asked today about Canada's debt to GDP ratio relative to other countries. I would, and you said that we have a very good debt to GDP ratio when we compare ourselves to other G7 countries. That would include also federations that have within them municipalities, that have states and or provinces with debt levels as well. And so when you make that comparison, you're not excluding federations, are you? You're also looking at countries that have a federal structure of government, right?
Yeah, but when I make comparisons, I try to go with the same level, comparable numbers. For example, if we consider only federal debt levels in Canada, we consider only federal debt levels in other federations.
Yes. Yeah, but you're not excluding, when you look at other countries, you're not excluding federations. You're comparing Canada to other federations as well, and unitary states. You're not not exclusive in that regard. Okay, perfect. Yeah. I want to ask you, building on a question that Mr. Fraser had posed to you at the end of his line of questioning. Suppose for a moment that Canada had followed a minimal approach, had not introduced the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, had not introduced the wage subsidy program, the rent support program that we've seen for businesses, the loan assistance program, the Canada Emergency Business Account, of course, that's been introduced. What would be the economic impact of that? And I know that you haven't modeled that and your officials haven't worked on that. However, you did say that it's an interesting sort of a thought experiment, if you like. You study the economy. This is your expertise. What would you say if posed a question in those terms? If Canada had not introduced these programs, what would the net effect be on the economy, taking into account the most obvious thing, which is that the economy is ultimately about people. And if people are suffering, certainly our economy would suffer in ways that we've never seen before. I would, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but could you build upon that?
Sure. So in the absence of any government support, wage subsidies, income support measures, loans to businesses, we would have seen widespread, and I mean widespread, bankruptcies, both at the individual level and corporate level. So there would be even more restaurants that would say, we're not coming back. We would already see a lot of bankruptcies. So not that many people have enough savings to sustain them for periods of months at a time without having an income. So there'd be lots of defaults on mortgages, lots of repossessions of houses, of cars due to car loans not being paid, businesses going under, as I mentioned, credit card debts that go unserviced. So the cost of doing nothing would certainly be high. Instead of being borne by the government, it would have to be borne by businesses or banks or financial institutions or whoever is lending that money. They would absorb very high debt levels, and that would also mean very high levels of emotional distress and very high stress levels.
Can we infer from that, Mr. Giroux, that the cost of doing nothing could also have led to not just a recession, but perhaps even a depression? Is it possible to think in those terms?
I think it's possible to think in those terms, but I think the cost of doing nothing would just mean that the government would have ended up being forced to do something anyways, but probably something even more expensive or something even more radical than what the government felt that it had to do. For example, in the absence of any income support measures or loans, as I mentioned, widespread economic distress, bankruptcies, and so on. So you can easily imagine financial institutions in this country going under one after the other in such a catastrophic scenario. So the government would have had to bail out banks, which would probably not be much cheaper, certainly not cheaper than what we are currently doing as a country to support individuals and businesses. So the cost of doing nothing, I don't think you can really envisage that, because the government would have been forced to do something anyways. Instead of doing it in March, would have had to do it in late April or May, probably at a much higher price than the total. But that we will never know for sure, because we don't want to run such a bad social experiment.
Thank you. Andrew Scheer and the Conservatives have suggested that there is an apparent need, at least from their perspective, to reduce the Canada Emergency Response benefit for those accessing it. Do you have any thoughts on what that would mean for the average Canadian consumer who is on the CERB at the present time out of necessity, and what that could imply for the Canadian economy?
In such a hypothetical scenario, one would have to look at the new level of the CERB. I think the question was related to the disincentives to work. And of course, the moment you provide a benefit to individuals without the requirement, an associated requirement to provide work effort, there is a disincentive to work. But that's a totally different question. So to get to your point, we'd have to look at the specifics to be able to assess the impact on Canadian consumers and individuals and the economy.
Okay, thank you both,
Thank you.
Mr. Cumming, and then on to Mr. McLeod. James, 6 minutes.
Great, thank you to see you at committee again. Always enjoy to hear your testimony at this committee. I want to talk a little bit first about the $252 billion. It's funny how that just rolls off your tongue, $252 billion as a deficit. What level of confidence do you have that that number is actually accurate, given we continue to see additional spending, extension? It looks like there's going to be an extension to the wage subsidy program. But more importantly, what revenue is going to be generated by the economy, because that's a bit of an unknown. And so based upon your scenario, how quickly did you see provinces reopening and actually starting to produce revenue again in that scenario for the $252 billion?
So in that scenario, we see physical distancing measures being gradually eased over the spring and being lifted not before the end of the calendar year. So some measures would remain in place throughout the year. So provinces and the federal government would continue to have revenues, but the revenues would certainly not go back to the pre-pandemic level during the current fiscal year. We'd probably have to wait more than after the end of the fiscal year for the pre-pandemic revenues, government revenues, to return to the same level. So it's several months, if not a few years, until we would see the same level of government revenues as we had in February, for example. With respect to the confidence level that I have in the $252 billion deficit figure, I'd say it depends on a number of things. Physical distancing measures being lifted gradually throughout the remainder of 2020. It assumes that oil prices will remain low for the rest of the year. But we also stopped taking into consideration measures as of April 24th because we had at one point to go to print. So in my view, the $252 billion figure is probably on the optimistic side. So if I had to bet on that number, I'd say it's more likely to be worse than that than it is likely to be better than that. So I think 252 is probably on the very optimistic side as things stand now. But as I said before, we could be pleasantly surprised. A genius could come up with a vaccine tomorrow, and we could go back to living a normal life by September. But that doesn't look like it for now. So, in all likelihood, the deficit will be higher than 252.
And so I think it's a safe assumption then, because you've done some analysis prior COVID on the debt that's being taken on, as much as my honored colleague had suggested, provincial debt, municipal debt. So all of those, I think it's a safe assumption that the level of this could be quite a bit higher. So that leads to, we have two options here when we get into this scenario. One is having tax capacity, which Canada, from a competitive standpoint, was getting pretty close, if I remember, to some of your reports, there was concern about our competitiveness, and also generating revenue. So how important would it be, as we look forward, any initiatives by government, whether it be on infrastructure funding or tax planning, to encourage investment in revenue producing assets versus those assets that actually incur additional cost as we try and work our way out of COVID?
So a crisis like the one we are living, as sad as it is, presents opportunities. As you mentioned, there will certainly be a need and a desire for stimulus measures to be implemented. And when that time comes, the government should seriously consider productivity enhancing stimulus measures as opposed to pure spending that doesn't lead to greater well-being and greater wealth generating capacity, for example. So it will be important to have a plan in place when the time is appropriate for stimulus measures that generate additional growth and wealth for the country, as opposed to spending for the sake of spending. That being said, it would be beneficial if the government was to lay out its recovery plan, once the pandemic is, the end of the pandemic is in sight, or at the very least, a fiscal update as soon as possible, so that Canadians have a much better sense of the depth of the deficit and the economic situation.
So how critical, in your opinion, to bring that confidence, particular investment confidence and public, the confidence in the business community and the public sector, is for the urgency of coming up with some sort of plan so that people can be aware that there is some thought on how we come out of this? How critical is the timing of that?
In my humble opinion, the sooner the better. However, it's a bit difficult to ask the government to come up with such a plan right now, as governments, and not just the federal government, but provincial and territorial governments, like the federal government as well, are all struggling to keep up with the pandemic and protect Canadians. However, the public service is capable of coming up with proposals and options with respect to an economic recovery plan. So I'm sure, having worked at finance and PCO, I'm sure that there are very bright minds working on providing advice to ministers and cabinet on a potential economic recovery plan. And in my opinion, the sooner this plan is made available and disclosed publicly, the better it is to instill that sense of confidence that you mentioned in Canadians and in businesses, that once the pandemic is over, there will be an economy to go back to, there will be investment opportunities, and there will be jobs for people who have lost their jobs. So there will be another side to that pandemic. So in my opinion, the sooner that it is out there, the better it is for all of us collectively.
Thank you. Thank you both, and thank you for that comment to Mr. Giroux. I hope somebody upstairs is listening to that comment on the need for an economic recovery plan shortly. We'll go to Mr. McLeod, and then I'll let you in for a 5-minute round, Elizabeth. Mr. McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Parliamentary Budget Officer. Very interesting discussion we have going on today. My question to the parliamentary budget officer, when you were before committee in early March, I had asked you about the worrying fiscal sustainability issues in the Northern Territories, with the Northern Territorial governments. The situations that they were facing. I can only imagine your next fiscal sustainability report will show that the pandemic has made the situation far worse. And given our small tax base, our high service and infrastructure gaps, and our very limited fiscal levers, the territories have relative to the larger orders of government. Would you agree that the North is in a particularly precarious situation now?
It's undoubtedly worse than it was before. Even though the health situation in the territories might not be as bad as it is in some provinces, the economic impact is probably hard. It's probably felt very hardly in the or very strongly in the territories as it is in most regions of the country. So with the economic downturn and a recession this year, it's clear that the economic situation in all provinces and territories has clearly not improved. And when we release our next fiscal sustainability report, probably next year, I don't think the situation will have improved for any jurisdiction. And that is also valid for the Northwest Territories, Yukon, and Nunavut, sadly.
Well, would certain steps by the federal government assist in addressing this situation? For example, greater flexibility in cost-sharing projects, like big infrastructure projects, greater usage of base plus per capita allocations of federal programming, increasing the debt limit, something we've been asking for a while. This issue is of greater urgency now. As at the start of 2020, the government of Northwest Territories was about $300 million away from hitting its $1.3 billion debt limit.
So when we released the fiscal sustainability report last time in January, and the report before that in 2018, it showed clearly that the federal government was on a sustainable track over the next 75 years, that provinces and territories in aggregate were not. So I expected, maybe naively, that the discussion in the country would probably evolve towards different responsibilities or different sharing of revenues between the federal and provincial governments. That has not happened. So the current crisis probably underlines that there will still be a need for that discussion because in the end, there's only one taxpayer. So if one level of government is sustainable, the others are not. It's about time to have a discussion about the sharing of the fiscal pie and how we can generate revenues and allocate them differently, as well as responsibilities. Who's responsible for what? So all that to say, the suggestions you made, they all seem to be valid to me to ensure a better financial sustainability for the territories. But it's a policy decision as to which ones are the preferred one for any particular situation. But nothing that you mentioned strikes me as inappropriate or going against that, except maybe increasing the debt limit if a territory or a jurisdiction is unsustainable over the long term. Allowing it to borrow even more might not be the solution. It might be a temporary solution, but it's probably not a long-term solution.
You get 2 minutes left, Michael.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask one more question regarding the fiscal sustainability report, which is done, and I think the parliamentary budget officer said won't be happening until next year. Is there a way to get a snapshot fiscally of all the different jurisdictions, all the provinces and territories, where they're at and where they rank on an interim basis through your office?
Last report we released on that fiscal sustainability report of provinces and territories was released in January. We didn't have sufficient data to disaggregate the 3 territories, but I don't think individual territories would have that different a picture. When it comes to updating that report or numbers, I think it would probably be premature to do that now, given that the economic and fiscal situation is very, very much in flux. So we can look at what we can do, but I don't think it'll be possible to do anything that would be solid or at least remotely reliable when it comes to the provincial and territorial fiscal situation anytime between the now and the end of the year, given all the expenditures and the very fluid economic situation, sadly.
Okay,
Thank you
thank you both for that round. We'll go to 5-minute rounds. We'll start with Ms. May, then we'll go to Mr. Brunel Duceppe, Mr. Julian, Mr. Cooper, Ms. Koutrakis, Mr. Polyev, and Ms. Zerowitz. Elizabeth, you're on. Your mic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, colleagues in the committee. First of all, I can't see Pierre Poilievre's picture, it's gone, but I'm hoping he's sitting down because I'd like to start by thanking Stephen Harper for creating the.
Is anybody else having a problem hearing Elizabeth? Just hold on, Elizabeth. We're having a little job.
My mic.
There you
I
go.
apologize. I just wanted to. I was teasing Pierre. I just want to start by thanking. Oh, you are sitting down, Pierre. That's very good. I wanted to start by thanking Stephen Harper for creating the Parliamentary Budget Office. We've begun to take it for granted. And the excellence of your work, Monsieur Giroux, Dr. Yan, we're in your debt. I'm extraordinarily grateful because I have questions from constituents all the time about what it means for our future, how much deficit, how much debt can we handle. I find the clarity of your reports in this pandemic enormously helpful. But I wanted to ask, if I can, drilling down on something you just said. You said you hoped that the stimulus spending, when we see it post-pandemic, will be, quote unquote, productivity enhancing. I wonder if you have some specific suggestions of what you think, by category, obviously, what kind of spending would meet your goals of seeing something that actually takes advantage of a crisis to improve our economic indicators, particularly productivity?
That's a very broad question, Madame May. You're putting me to the test right now. There's a long list of potentially productivity enhancing stimulus measures. One can think of investing in technology, investing in health research, for example, which these days is what we clearly are begging for. Infrastructure spending is also very useful when it comes to facilitating transport and communications, trade. So there's a long list of potential investments, and it's up to people like you, members of parliament, to decide what's the best mix with the support of public servants and stakeholders. So far from being my role, and I don't pretend I have all the answers, but there are several types of investments that could be made that are productivity enhancing, and that could also stimulate the return to a more normal economy.
Thank you for taking a stab at something that was quite broad. We on this committee, changing gears, I mean, this is just an extraordinary privilege to thank my colleagues that I'm able to participate at all. We've had the great privilege of hearing people like yourself, of course, but Governor of Bank of Canada, our former Governor, Stephen Poloz, has testified. And he expressed what's generally, I think, the orthodoxy of global central banks, that in times like this, you have to do whatever you can to fight deflation, that our policies can be inflationary, such as cutting interest rates to near zero, such as quantitative easing. But we had one witness who was quite an iconoclast, and I don't know if it's fair to ask your opinion, but this question of whether we should actually rethink this. A witness named Jeffrey Booth, who wrote a book called The Price of Tomorrow, said that we really can't keep fighting deflation. The marginal cost of many things is going to start approaching zero. If it's renewable energy, the marginal cost of energy approaches zero, and in consumer goods and through artificial intelligence. I don't know if it's fair to ask you an opinion, but I found this contrast rather startling, and I don't know if it certainly is an iconoclastic view. I wondered if you'd offer an opinion.
Sure. I don't believe that the marginal cost of anything can be close to zero without there being an infinite demand for it. You mentioned the marginal cost of energy being close to zero. Then there'll be no incentive to save energy if energy costs virtually nothing. So demand will meet supply, and there'll be a cost to it. So its cost won't go back to zero. You may think that streaming costs zero, the marginal cost is zero, but eventually, when everybody is on the internet, as we find out these days in our neighborhoods, well, internet starts to be a bit slow, and internet service providers start thinking about increasing their prices because they'll have to increase the bandwidth. So I don't think that it's pointless to fight deflation, because if the marginal cost of something goes down to zero, there'll be an infinite demand for it, and it will mean that its marginal cost will not go down to zero. There are, of course, exceptions, but generally speaking, I don't think you can have deflation that's unbeatable or unfightable.
Thank you. I've been wanting to ask someone that question, and I appreciate the opportunity to ask you, Mr. Giroux. Thank you again for all your work and to your whole team.
Okay, thank you both, Mr. Brunel Duceppe, and then on to Mr. Julian. 5 minutes, Alexis.
Merci.
Yes, thank you. And hello, Mr. Giroux. I first of all want to underline that just like my colleague from Joliet said earlier, you haven't been slacking off lately, so congratulations. Now, recently we were talking about measures to stimulate the economy for the next phase, and there was a question asked of witness Mr. Littler representing retailers in Canada, and they've been asking for measures for a very long time, for several sessions. We've asked the same question of Mr. Morneau. It's about the exchange, the costs that retailers have to pay for every transaction. We know that in COVID era, no one is using cash. It's all credit cards and so on, and there's a cost to that. So if we imitated Europe, for instance, or Australia, they've done this already. They've set that at a limit of 0.3% for each transaction. Currently, it's 1.5%, but in actual fact, it's around 2% or sometimes 2.5% in certain situations, and that really decreases profits for retailers. So setting that at 0.3 as it's done elsewhere, would that not help to get the economy started again? Because it's an extra cost for these retailers, and they would then pay more income tax because there would be greater profit there. So this is a request that has been made for a long time. Would it be a good measure to apply here in Quebec and in Canada? Thank you, Mr. Giuseppe. This is not a question that we considered specifically, or at least not since I've been a parliamentary budget officer, but it is a question that would certainly merit consideration, because these interchange costs are practically a monopoly, a quasi-monopoly that service providers have, and retailers really have no other option but to offer this mode of payment. And for the past 2 months, we've seen how widespread it is. It's the preferred mode of payment for many who are working in retail or in food, so, for many consumers. So there's not many options, and not many options in service providers. It's not a monopoly. It's there are several but just a handful of providers. And so when you're dealing with a monopoly, often what a government would do would be to regulate so that pricing is reasonable. Now, I'm not a specialist in the payment system. Would the interchange costs, are they at a reasonable level or not? as a consumer, when I know that by using my credit card, 2 or 3% or even more is going to go to various financial intermediaries, it sort of it feels awful to think that 2 or 3% of the retailers' amount of sale will go to funding a financial institution. Maybe that would be worthwhile looking into this issue and maybe regulating it if the fees seem abusive. But as I said, this is not my field of expertise. As a consumer, I am concerned about this. Yeah, it makes sense at the end of the day. Thank you very much, Mr. Giroux. And your office has worked on various measures to help our seniors, especially during the elections. So my question is, would an increase in OAS or in the minimum income, would that help? For instance, an extra $100 per month for OAS, would that help our seniors? Would that help our regions and our retailers? And have these various cases been studied by your team as others have been?
Ou combien ça coûte d'augmenter le supplément de revenu garanti ou la sécurité de la vieillesse. Et on a...
Oups, j'entends la traduction en anglais dans mes oreilles.
Sorry about that. Sorry. No. The interpreter is sorry. So yes, we looked at the cost, but we did not wonder if it was something that we could afford or not. If the question is if we can afford to increase those benefits, it's a public policy choice. Of course, it depends on the choices that parliamentarians are wishing to make, because all the choices that you make are arbitrations. So if you put more money in the old age benefit, it means that you have to increase taxes or put less money in other public intervention sectors. We did not either consider the economic impact that the increase in this guaranteed supplement could have on the economic activity in the regions. But of course, if we give more money to people who have low income, well, those revenues are spent, of course, for things that are close to home. So, of course, it has a positive impact on the economy of the regions of Canada because seniors are found everywhere in the country. Thank you. Do I still have some time?
No, you're quite a bit over, Alexis. We'll go to Mr. Julian, followed by Mr. Cooper. 5-minute rounds. Peter?
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much again, Mr. Giroux, for your presence here today. Now, we've just talked about this whole aspect of cuts and austerity because of COVID-19, but of course there are other alternatives. And we've talked about tax havens, taxes that are escaping our collective investments. So after the COVID-19, it would be interesting to do something more interesting to improve quality of life for our citizens. And as it was said, the family debt, following all the cuts made at the federal level, mean that after this pandemic, we should put in place some resources to improve the quality of life of people. So I have two questions to ask you on this. First, there's a sector that benefited greatly from this crisis. It's the web giants sector. So have you made an analysis concerning those internet giants that don't pay taxes very often, that don't give unemployment insurance to their employees very often, that don't pay for unemployment insurance? So for all those aspects, have you made a study on this? And if not, would it be something that you would be willing to consider? And secondly, the tax on wealth, which is already in existence in other countries. I know that you've made an analysis during the electoral campaign on the positive impact of that wealth tax. So can you give us the conclusions of that study and tell us once again, for the common investments, what would be the increased level of investment that we could expect in order, of course, to benefit all Canadian citizens? Thank you. Thank you. So to my knowledge, we have not considered exactly how much money, strictly speaking, how much money is escaping the government through the web giants. But what we've considered is a certain level of taxing on revenues beyond a certain level for the high-tech companies. We can name them or not, but we know what we're referring to. So we've considered the effect of a tax of 3%, for example, for companies that have revenues beyond a certain level. And I don't remember the exact amounts that those taxes would generate, but my colleague can complete my answer once I have answered the second part of the question. The wealth tax, we've considered how much that would generate, and unfortunately, I don't have the amounts here. But maybe Shaoli has a better memory than me. But it's important to have control measures because people who would see a wealth tax coming would try very quickly to avoid being subjected to that tax, and they could take measures to avoid those taxes. So if we want to impose such a tax, what's important is how we design it and how we approach it. We have to think about the exemptions that we have in mind, and we have to have a good structure to make it complied with. So maybe Charles has a complement of an answer on the amounts that we could generate on a tax on the web giants and the amounts that could be generated by a wealth tax. Shall we?
As the PBO correctly puts it, during the electoral platform costing, we did looking into the web giants, the potential sales in Canada, and what if we were to tax that part of the revenue, what potential income tax that would come into this country. I don't have that number offhand. We looked into several issues, but like the PBO said, we didn't look at it systematically as a total amount that would escape the country through these web giants.
Regarding go ahead. Sorry, go ahead, Dr. Yan.
Okay. Regarding the taxation on wealth, during the electoral platform costing, we also looked into 20% tax the taxation on net wealth of high net worth individuals. At that time, we were limited by the time. We knew for sure that the top end of the net worth individuals were underestimated because we didn't have very good data to represent the top end of the high wealth individuals. So the recent report that Mr. Giroux mentioned about is going to address this issue much more methodically and systematically. So we are very confident now. We have come up with a modeling approach that can more accurately estimate the high-end net worth that's concentrated in a small percentage of individual families. And that's also brought in line with the national balance sheet accounts. So if I would say what would be the number after all these refinement was done, it's going to be in that report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll look forward to that report. Sorry, Peter, you're well over. We'll go on to Mr. Cooper, followed by Ms. Kotrakis. Michael?
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to Mr. Giroux for being here. Before I ask some questions to Mr. Giroux, I do want to correct the record. My friend, Mr. Fragascatos, suggested that Andrew Scheer advocated cutting or taking Canadians off CERB. That is simply not the case. Now, to Mr. Giroux, you noted in answer to a question posed by Mr. Cumming that the current projected deficit of $252 billion is a very optimistic projection, to quote you. And that's certainly understandable, but you would say that having regard that on April 9th, in your fiscal scenario, your office estimated a budget deficit for fiscal year 2021 to be $184.2 billion. 3 weeks later, that is now up to $252.1 billion, $70 billion more in the span of 3 weeks. In other words, more than 3 times the estimated deficit pre-COVID for fiscal year 2021. So really staggering numbers when you put it in that context. Now, your figure of $252.1 billion, as you note, is up to federal measures taken to April 24th. So presumably that excludes the Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program, as well as the student package, among other measures. In your testimony, you stated that taking into consideration federal measures after April 24th, that the budget deficit would be a few $billion more. I was wondering if you could perhaps elaborate on just how much more, if you're in a position to be able to comment.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. I would like to be able to elaborate more on that, but we don't have details of some of these measures. For example, the large employer emergency financing facility, it's a new measure, and I don't have the details, so I'm not in a position to determine how much it would cost. Same with the extension of the wage subsidy past June. So I don't know by how long it will be extended or what terms the extension will be for. The emergency commercial rent assistance was announced on April 16, but the details were announced after we went to print, so we don't have the details. And so all that to say, it's very difficult to estimate what is a likely deficit figure, given that details are missing for some of these potentially very expensive measures. I'm not judging them on their merit, but they're very likely to be expensive. So, and that points to what I said before, the need for a fiscal update by the government to give Canadians a better idea as to what the deficit is likely to be, because the government probably has in mind a sense of how much it wants to spend on potential stimulus measures, but we don't have that information. So again, that's why the figure of $252 billion is very likely to be the very optimistic scenario, as opposed to the number for the deficit for the current fiscal year.
Great, thank you for that, Mr. Giroux. I want to ask a question about the federal debt to GDP ratio, but certainly I would underscore the point made by Mr. Poilievre that when you look at public and private debt, the debt to GDP ratio was over 350% before COVID, and where that puts Canada relative to other G7 countries is actually second in terms of the highest debt to GDP ratio after Japan. But nonetheless, in your report, you do make reference at page 13 to the debt to GDP ratio stabilizing. But you note that that would not necessarily be the case if measures were made permanent or extended. So would it be fair to say, much as your $252 billion deficit projection for fiscal year 2021 is very optimistic, so too is your projection of the GDP, debt to GDP ratio stabilizing?
So we finished drafting the report on April 24th. And these days, a week can feel like a month. Sometimes it can feel like a year, depending who you are living with, because we're spending most of our time at home. So lots of things change. And I would say that the debt to GDP ratio stabilizing once the economy recovers, again, depends a lot on government actions. For example, whether it will return to a deficit level that were that we saw before the pandemic, which seems very unlikely, at least in the short term, and maybe even in the medium term, given the state of the economy. So debt to GDP ratio stabilizing, that's only once the economy returns to its pre-pandemic growth rates, and we see deficits at the federal level returning to the $20 billion range that we had before the pandemic, or even better, which is not for next year. I'd be very, very surprised.
Okay, thank you very much, you both. We'll go to Ms. Kotrakis and then on to Mr. Polyev. Annie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Giroux and Dr. Yan, for your testimony today. Your testimony is staggering to me when I hear all the numbers, as I'm sure all my colleagues on the committee here today. What I heard with interest and more importantly is, had the government not stepped in and taken these drastic measures and came in to address what the Canadians would be going through if we had not done it, I shudder to think where our economy would be headed and where the Canadians would be at this point. I'm going to be sticking to the analogy with World War II because it's the first time we've faced a crisis such as this since World War II. At the time, we had mobilized the entire nation and the economy, and we won, but we ran deficits of approximately 20% of GDP for about 5 years. When the war ended and the economy kept growing and we were into surpluses 2 years later, is there any reason for you to think that if in the short term, we continue with deficits of 15 or 20% of GDP, is there any reason why we cannot come out of this stronger post-COVID-19?
That's a very interesting question. I think the fundamental reason why we are not in the same position coming out of COVID-19 as we were coming out of World War II is a demographic structure. Coming out of World War II, the population was much younger. The baby boom was about to start and leading to a long period of growth. Coming out of COVID-19, we have a much older population, fewer working age individuals. I'm not sure we'll see a baby boom. Maybe we'll see a divorce boom, depending who you are confined with. But I certainly don't see a baby boom to the same extent that we had in World War II. So for that reason, I'm not sure we should expect the same level of government surpluses that we had at the end of World War II. That being said, will we be coming out of this stronger? I certainly hope so. And I am optimistic that we will be coming out of this stronger. That's outside of the mandate of the PBO, but there will be more social cohesion, I think. It will have bound people together. Spending months together with your kids and spouse certainly strengthens these bonds. Sometimes cuts them for good, but in many cases will have strengthened them. Some businesses will go under, which is very sad, but like a wildfire, there are things that bloom after a fire. So new businesses will emerge out of that very sad period, economically and socially sad period. So I am overall optimistic that in a few months, maybe years, we will we will have a very strong country, but it will come at a price that some of our colleagues and citizens will pay and will be dear.
I hope it doesn't come to a divorce boom. I mean, we just came up with a new expression, and I really would hate to think that, this COVID pandemic created a divorce boom. Just going back to the financial crisis in 2008, are there any lessons that we can draw that may be pertinent in the current environment from a public finance perspective?
Sure. And so coming out of the last recession, 2008-9, the deficit level was back then very high, or so we thought, at $55 billion. But with efforts, the economy started growing again, and the fiscal situation of the country improved again relatively quickly. It seemed long at the time, but all that to say, there is hope. As long as governments intervene to support people in need, and also withdraw these supports when they're no longer necessary. So the experience of 2008-9 suggests that governments at all levels have a role to play during a crisis, but they also have a role to not play when the crisis is over by withdrawing the support that becomes unnecessary, as we saw in 2008, 2009, with credit that was made available to financial institutions and various actors, which was temporary in nature, was allowed to expire, and businesses returned to normal with economic growth that was there to support Canadians.
Okay, we will have to end it there. Thank you both. We'll go to Mr. Polyev, who will be followed by Ms. Zerowitz, and we will have time probably for 3 single questions if people want to give me an indication they want to ask one. So, Mr. Polyev, 5 minutes. Gotcha, Peter.
Thank you very much. Madam Katrakis talked about the deficits that ran in the World War II period, but your report points out that in the years following, the government actually ran a 5% of GDP annual surplus. That would be, in today's terms, $115 billion surpluses. If we were running huge deficits before this crisis even began, which the government was, it's hard to imagine that they're going to be returning Canada to $115 billion a year surplus in the next fiscal year, or even the one after that, or ever for that matter. I want to ask you, though, about the 90s. You pointed out that in mid-90s, we basically went bankrupt, and the government's brought in massive spending cuts. The Liberal government in Ottawa cut spending by 10% in absolute terms. Governments across the country did likewise. And in the aftermath of that, the economy experienced massive economic growth. Unemployment fell basically by 1/3. Do you find that interesting, given that we're told now that the only way to precipitate growth is through more and more deficit spending?
It's true that once the economy is over a very difficult period, such as a crisis, reducing government interventions tends to have positive impacts. And one can think of government interventions that are necessary in times of crisis, such as 2008, 2009, or the current crisis. So it's not unthinkable to imagine a world where we return to the pre-crisis level of government spending, and that unleashes economic growth because of the sad economic downturn that will have taken place. So it's not surprising to me that in the 1990s, where we had poor economic prospects, the country was deemed an honorary member of the Third World by the Wall Street Journal. Governments took action to change the mood and instill confidence by reducing spending and ensuring that the finances were on a more sustainable path. It led to increased investments and economic growth. That's very often what happens.
Right. I mean, in the early 90s, from the early 90s to the late 90s, government spending a share of GDP, all government, went from 53% to about 38%, a massive reduction in the size of government relative to GDP. And what happened? The economy grew dramatically and unemployment dropped. So that is the historical record. Now, back to the present and dealing with the massive debts our country faces today, do you have a calculation of the contingent liabilities faced by the Government of Canada as a result of its insurance on private debt, like mortgages or other loan guarantees of private enterprise?
I don't have that number off the top of my head, but that's an area that has attracted quite a bit of interest in the office and by me. So we are closely following that, and we are looking at the total number of loan guarantees and contingent liabilities that could result from all these various hundreds of billions of dollars of loan guarantees and support programs to the private sector through various government agencies. So we don't have a number right now, and so it's difficult to come up with the contingent liabilities that could be forced on the government's books.
Right, but back to my earlier point, we cannot separate government debt from private debt, because in the case of mortgages, government-backed enterprises like CMHC, Canada Guarantee, and Genworth are responsible for ensuring default losses on the vast majority of mortgages in this country. If Canadians lose their work, lose their homes, and banks lose money on repossession, taxpayers are going to have to take on all of that debt to back up the banks. So that's even more of a liability that you have not included in the 48% number of debt to GDP ratio. So there are so many liabilities, other levels of government, private sector, households, and in addition to that, government contingent liabilities like the one I just described, that are piling one on top of the other. When you consider all of these levels of debt, are you not concerned that we could be in some trouble in 2 or 3 years if we don't act quickly to get ourselves out from under it?
It is concerning, especially if you consider a scenario where interest rates start going up and debt servicing costs become unbearable. However, in such a scenario, it's not likely. It doesn't mean it's impossible. And it is indeed concerning. But the governor of the bank and various stakeholders have warned Canadians for a number of years to stop piling on such high levels of debt because it's risky. But Canadians have a big appetite for debt, as demonstrated by their spending habits and the fact that they incur more and more debt. So it is concerning. But when you look at these individual components, the question is the federal government in and of itself in a worrisome position right now? The answer is no, because debt servicing costs are not that high. But as you are asking, if you start adding all these debts and you take the catastrophic approach where the federal government ends up being responsible for all these, or the taxpayer, yes, it is a concerning amount of debt. But the likelihood of all that falling on the shoulders of taxpayers is quite low.
Okay, then we'll go on to Ms. Zerowitz, and I see Peter has a question following that, a single question. Is there anybody else? And Marty and Elizabeth, and then we'll end it at that. Okay, Peter, Julian?
No, Julie.
Or, sorry, Julie. You're up, Julie.
Thank you. So I just want to say thanks so much, Mr. Giroux. Thanks so much for being here today, for your hard work, and thank you for your extraordinary service to Canadians. Thank you. You know, in the conversation today, I was thinking, if I was a Davenport resident, so Davenport is my riding in downtown West Toronto, I was thinking, what is it that they would think? So I think if they were listening and they were hearing about the fact that our deficit might go past 252 billion, and that, you know, our collective debt levels in Canada would go beyond $900 billion, I think there would be a lot of concern. I think, though, when the average Canadian sort of then goes to, well, what would have been the cost of us doing nothing, or of being frozen with fear because of these debt levels? What would be the cost of doing nothing to our economy, to our banks, in terms of bankruptcy? So in terms of our health, what would have been the cost? I think that, as mentioned in our discussion, the cost would have been even worse than where we're at today. I also would probably take some comfort to know that Canada is doing relatively well in our G7. In comparison, we were doing well before this pandemic, and we continue to line up fairly well right now. And then I think I'd also take some comfort in what Governor Polos had mentioned the last time he was with us, when, in response to a question as to whether or not Canada would be, you know, did he think Canada would be able to recoup or sort of reestablish growth of the anticipated 4 to 6% GDP loss of this pandemic? He said there's no reason to believe that we couldn't recover that growth, and two, that we wouldn't actually be able to make positive structural changes. And then last week, the Prime Minister, when questions to the of the media to him were, you know, what are your thoughts about moving forward in terms of the economy and how to support the Canadian economy? He said the Canadian government is very much focused on building back better. So that is where we're focused on. And I really take to heart your encouragement to our government to say, make sure that as soon as possible, any type of economic recovery plan is actually put forward to Canadians as soon as possible. So my question to you, Mr. Giroux, building back better. There's a lot of opportunities we have. It's a generational opportunity to actually rebuild better, both our economy and our society. And I wonder if you might have any ideas or any contributions about how do we build back better.
Thank you for the compliments, and thanks to all of you who have complimented the work of the office. Building back or having a stimulus package, I've already responded, I think, to Madame May, who had a similar question. So as long as these are productivity enhancing measures, I think it has prospects for longer term growth or inducing longer term growth. So I've already talked about investments that facilitate transportation, trade, or communications. Research is also an area that is productivity enhancing. It can be hit and miss, but once you hit a gold mine, then it rewards investments in research. So it's not my area of expertise. I'm not in the business of providing policy advice, but you get the general gist of what I said and what I mean. So as long as these are productivity enhancing investments, I think that's something that would have the most benefit while also providing economic stimulus. The question of whether or not there is a need for economic stimulus is also a bit premature to answer. It depends what type of recovery we have, but assuming that there is a need for economic stimulus, these would be the types of investments that would make the most sense from an economic perspective.
And so thank you for that. And Mr. Giroux, do you know of any other country that's already produced some sort of an economic recovery plan?
Not to my knowledge. What I've seen is mostly deconfinement or resumption of businesses, but I haven't seen economic stimulus plans by countries. It doesn't mean they don't exist. It just means that I'm not aware of any right now. I've been quite busy with the current report and costings of government measures.
Okay, perfect. And then just maybe one last tiny question. Because of the pandemic, do you see in any way the role of your office changing, either being enhanced or changing, or there needing to be something more to be done as a result of this pandemic and us coming out of it?
I see the absence of information that is credible and nonpartisan. Let me rephrase that. I see the role of the office being enhanced as a result of the pandemic. There is clearly an appetite for nonpartisan and objective information and analysis when it comes to the state of the nation's economy and national finances. So the electoral period last year showed that we can provide credible and needed analysis and information costings in that case. And the current pandemic, while government is busy coming up with economic measures and support measures, it hasn't paid that much attention to providing a fiscal picture. So the role of the office, I think, is appreciated by many stakeholders, including parliamentarians and Canadians, when it comes to providing a sense of the magnitude of expenditures so far. So I clearly see a need for the office, both in times of economic growth and dire economic circumstances like this one.
Merci. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And yes, you do excellent work there, Mr. Giroux. Just a quick question before I go to Mr. Julian for one and Mr. Morantz for one and Ms. May. Basically, to support business and the economy and jobs that businesses create, the government has come in with a lot of measures, basically, to provide liquidity. How do you expect to I guess measure the cost as you go down the line and study and do reports on what we're doing as a government? How do you factor in those liquidity measures, the risks and the costs that might be there?
So we do that, and we did that for the delay in remitting taxes that the government has offered to individuals and businesses. So you look at the cost of borrowing. The government provides funding to businesses, so the government has to borrow that money itself, or borrow more than it otherwise would. So there's one cost there. It gets revenues in the form of interest income from these corporations and businesses. So these are usually offsetting or more than offsetting. But looking at previous economic crises and difficult circumstances, such as the 2008-2009 crisis, there's a default rate that we can look at based on previous experiences. So there's a number of businesses that will not be able to repay the assistance, or some that will not repay it in full. So we look at previous experience to determine what proportion of these loans will never be repaid, and that's how we can estimate the cost of these measures. In some instances, there's no net cost because experience has shown that all these amounts get paid, or a small amount never gets repaid, but it's more than offset by the interest income the government makes. In some other cases, there's a small cost relative to the size of the overall loans, because there's a proportion of businesses that can't repay, and this is not offset by the income generated through interest revenues. So that's how, in a nutshell, how we estimate these costs, or sometimes revenues.
Okay, thank you very much. That's quite important. Mr. Julian, and then Mr. Morantz.
Well, Mr. Giroux, Dr. Yan, thank you very much for being here. You're rock stars because you protect the public interest. And you're very credible when you talk about both issues during the pandemic, but coming out of the pandemic. You've identified a number of ways that the government can actually ensure that we stop handing out money to Canada's wealthiest corporations and actually invest it to make a difference for people. Another aspect of the recovery is making sure that every dollar counts, and we're actually making investments that help people. So I have to ask the question, you've explored the issue of the Trans Mountain Pipeline that we spent $1 billion more than we should have to purchase, and recent construction costs have evaluated anywhere from $15 to $20 billion. It's the biggest boondoggle in Canadian history. I'm wondering if you have a revised construction cost, or whether the PBO has been actually looking into the escalating construction costs of Trans Mountain, and also whether you're looking into the escalating costs of climate change and its impact on government operations, of course, and the Canadian economy.
So, Mr. Julian, I'll have disappointing answers to both of your questions. And it's no, we haven't looked at the providing an update to the construction costs of Trans Mountain, and we haven't looked at the cost of climate change. That being said, we will be releasing over the next several weeks an update to our Canada meeting or not, it's Paris targets. So there'll be some work that will be released over the next several weeks. So I don't want to give a timeline in front of the committee without being certain that we will be meeting that. But there's work that's currently being done. So hopefully by the end of the summer, we'll have something for you on that. But sadly, not the cost of climate change, nor a revised cost for Trans Mountain.
Okay, thank you for that. I would just throw in there, because I have Peter and I've had this discussion before. You should factor in the fact that it costs Canada about close to $500 billion a year because by the Alberta discount, because we don't have a proper outlet for oil. Mr. Morantz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I just want to respectfully circle back to a couple of the statements you made earlier. One is with respect to this increased debt, $252 billion, not affecting the draw on the operating budget. My understanding is that pre-COVID debt is locked in for a long period of time and that those interest rates are set. Certainly adding more debt, and you said it was counterintuitive, must add more interest cost and to be drawn against the operating budget. But in addition to that, you also said, and I think I heard you correctly a moment ago, you said that you thought it was unlikely that interest rates would rise. A few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to question the Governor of the Bank of Canada, Mr. Paulos, on this very question. And in fact, it's on the record, he said that interest rates will most certainly rise once we come out of this. And in fact, he thought that would be a good problem to have, I guess from a Bank of Canada perspective, if there's inflation. Increasing interest rates would be a tool for him to use. But he did say that. So I think we can't assume interest rates are going to stay low after we come out of this. There's trillions of dollars across the world in quantitative easing going on. And so I'm just wondering, assuming we're in that position, will the Liberals, like they did in 1990, have to adopt a program of austerity and start cutting their budgets, or are they going to have to start increasing taxes, or a combination of those things?
So I'll probably address the second part of your question. Interest rates rising. When I say I don't anticipate interest rates to rise, it's in the context of the scenario note that we released, which only looks as far as the end of 2020, so the current calendar or fiscal year. So in that short period of time, we don't anticipate interest rates to rise, at least not significantly. But I agree with the governor that interest rates will probably start rising gradually as we get out of this difficult period, COVID-19, because once the economy starts to recover, I don't see any way but interest rates to go up. They can't go much down. They're close to historical lows, so they will probably rise. The question is when? Is it next year, early next year, late next year, middle of next year? I don't know. So the governor is, I fully agree with the governor that interest rates will start to rise.
Okay.
The first part, oh, sorry, Mr. Chair.
No, go ahead, Mr. Giroux.
So the first part of your question, so we have indeed debt that's locked in, but we have we have a debt stock that is $600 billion, but there's always a proportion of that debt that needs to be refinanced. So the Bank of Canada is issuing new debt instruments on an ongoing basis because it's not all 50-year or 100-year bonds. There's some 90 days treasury bills, 6 months, 9 months, a year, and these have constantly to be rolled over. And that's why lower interest rates can result in slightly lower or stable interest debt charges, even though the debt goes up.
Okay, Elizabeth, a 30-second question, if you could.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quickly then, I know it's a natural impulse that people will feel when so much money has been spent that when the pandemic begins to end and we begin to reopen economy, there'll be, I'm sure, a call for put the brakes on, we've spent enough. And I'm looking at that post-war analogy and the Marshall Plan and the various things that continue to be spent. I think, from my perspective, I have a bias here. I think that the federal government and government spending will be, in a lot of ways, for governments around the world, the only game in town. What would be the impact on our economy if we stopped the government stimulus spending as we recover?
Thanks, Madam May. That's a very interesting question, and the answer to that is not straightforward. The impact of stopping the stimulus will depend on the strength of the recovery and the speed of the recovery. So if the recovery is strong and the engine is full speed ahead, then the impact of withdrawing economic support or stimulus would probably be minimal. In fact, it would be beneficial. It would avoid crowding out private sector investments and economic activity. On the other hand, if the economic recovery does not materialize, then one could envisage economic support by the government to be needed, maybe at a lower level because the economy will be reopened, but there might be scope or need for some level of support for more than right after the pandemic is over.
Okay, with that, we will have the end. Pierre, we're over time. What's your point?
It's a terrific one. It'll be very brief. Do you think I could just ask a 10-second question of the Parliamentary Budget Officer?
10 seconds is it.
Thank you for all you do, PBO, and your office is fantastic. Let me ask you, is it possible or realistic that the government's, the federal debt could reach $1 trillion in this fiscal year?
Possible, yes. Realistic, yes. Certainly not unthinkable.
Thank you.
Okay. Look, to you both, Dr. Yan, Mr. Giroux, we want to thank not just the two of you certainly for your appearance, but all those in the back office who do so much in-depth work. We thank them as well, and we know many of the public services working overtime during this pandemic. So I give our best wishes, safe health to them as well. We thank you very much for coming today, answering our questions. Your reports are very valuable to us and certainly help us at the Finance Committee do our job. So thank you. And with that, we will suspend for about 3 minutes and come back to a panel with the Auditor General. Meeting suspended. Thank you both.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, all the members.
Bonjour, Monsieur Ricard, est-ce que vous m'entendez?
You hear me, Mr. Ricard? Can you hear me, Mr. Ricard? I can't hear you, and apparently your microphone is on. No, you have to switch on your mic. Is it working now? Yes, it's working now. So you're doing well? Yes, and you? Yes, thank you. I'm Christine Lafrance. I'm the clerk at the House of Commons. Mr. Ricard, would you be so kind as to talk for a few seconds so that we can do a sound check with the interpreters? You can talk about what you're reading now, for example. Well, I'm preparing for a hearing in front of a parliamentary committee. And we hope to be able to help the committee as much as possible, as best as we can. I don't know if I've spoken for long enough. Yes, we can hear you well. Thank you, Mr. Ricard. Very well. Thank you, Mr. Ricard. I will have to familiarize myself with the various buttons. Yes, I'll be back with you. Mr. Hayes, are you there?
Trying to find you in my on my screen. Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you. My name is Christine. I'm a clerk at the House of Commons.
Okay.
Would you be so kind as to speak for approximately 10 or 15 seconds so the interpreters can have a sound test?
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Andrew Hayes. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development. Was that enough?
Hi, Mr. Hayes. Would you happen to have a headset you could use for today's meeting?
I do not have a headset. I'll move closer to the computer.
Yeah, so the only problem with the built-in microphone of your device is it picks up a lot of background noise, and right now you're coming in a little bit echoey, so it makes it harder for the interpreters. When moving closer, we can hear you louder, but it doesn't really solve the echo or the background noise.
Okay, is there a solution that I should explore? Should I open the door or something?
So unfortunately, if you don't have a headset you could use, there's only so much we can do. The interpreters will do what they can, but just a heads up that the sound on our end right now is a little bit echoey and we're picking up some background noise. So if you can, try to speak slowly and clearly while remaining natural, and speak a little bit closer to your device. That will help us a little bit. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, now for the interpretation. At the bottom of your screen, do you see something like a world sign, and it's written interpretation under it?
Yes.
Monsieur Ricard, m'avez-vous suivi?
Did you follow me? At the bottom of the screen, you have a little circle where it is written interpretation. Can you see that? No, I don't have that. At the bottom of the screen, I have nothing at all at the bottom of my screen unless... are you working with an iPad? Yes. You're on an iPad? Just 1 second. I'll go and check the menu at the top. Is there a technician? Interpretation. So you have to click on interpretation.
And then you should see English and French.
OK. Et là, ça, c'est pour...
Okay. So when you're speaking French, you have to be on the French channel.
On the English channel.
OK. Là, juste pour votre information.
For your information, it's a little bit strange because to go up to that menu, I have to click on 2 things. I have interpretation, original audio, French, and English. So when you speak French, you have to be on the French channel. And when you speak English, you have to be on the English channel. Well, I will do a test. I'll click on French. Bastien, are you there? So I'm now in French, it says French at the top, so maybe it will appear automatically. If I click on English, yes. So I've activated it once. There's a small button.
English. It now show English. So I guess if I'm speaking in English, I'm on the right channel. It says English. And if I click on that small button now, it opens the window again. I go French. Et là maintenant, ça m'a...
And now it says French. So that's would be the way to speak French. Now for my own audio, so as to keep the floor in my ears, how do I do that? Is there anyone from the technical service that could answer that question? Sorry, could you repeat the question? Yes, Mr. Ricard would like to know what he has to do to hear or to listen. If he speaks English or French, how can he listen to the floor? Because the English-French button is for when I'm speaking. I have to choose the language in which I'm speaking. Yes. Now to listen, I would like to listen the floor at all times. Good question. Yesterday, when we did the technical test, I was told that those were two totally different parameters. Well, I only have those parameters, so either you have to be in French or you have to be in English when you have to speak. And when you do neither, you're automatically on the floor channel. Bastien? Pouvons-nous commencer, Madame la greffière? Eh bien...
Thank you.
Donc, pour faire bref, je dois...
So to be brief, at all times when I'm speaking or listening, I have to select the language. Is that it? When I'm speaking French, I choose French, and when I speak English, I have to click on English, and when I want to listen, I choose either English, French, or the floor. Yes, you can choose the floor. That's not an issue.
Mr. Hayes?
Yes, I'm comfortable. Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Chair? Mr. Chair?
Yep.
The floor is yours.
Okay. Technology is so much fun. Interesting times. Okay, we will call the meeting to order again. Welcome, folks, to panel 2 of meeting number 27 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance. We're meeting pursuant to the order of reference of Tuesday, March 24th. That the committee meet on the government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think, as everyone knows, this meeting is taking place by video conference, and the proceedings will be made available by the House of Commons website. We're pleased on this second panel to have with us from the Office of the Auditor General, Sylvain Ricard, Interim Auditor General of Canada, and I believe Andrew Hayes. Andrew Hayes, Deputy Auditor General and Interim Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development. So welcome, folks. If you want to start with an opening statement, I believe we got about 90 minutes in that range. If you want to start with an opening statement, then we'll go to rounds of questions. And just for committee members, we will start on the round of questions with Mr. Polyev, then Ms. Zerowitz, Mr. St. Marie, and Mr. Juliet. The floor is yours, Mr. Ricard.
Monsieur le Président, je vous remercie de nous avoir invités à discuter.
So, Mr. Chair, thank you for inviting us to discuss the role of the Auditor General in examining the government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. With me today is Andrew Hayes, Deputy Auditor General and Interim Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development. We appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and I would like to thank members of Parliament, their staff, and all the staff of the House administration who have been working to ensure that standing committees can continue to operate. In these challenging times, I want to acknowledge the commitment and engagement of Canadians as they deal with this pandemic, including members of the Federal Public Service and my office's staff. Mr. Chair, the Office of the Auditor General of Canada has received 3 requests for audits from the House of Commons since Parliament resumed in January. We have informed the Speaker of the House that we will do these 3 audits. First, on January 29th, the House of Commons adopted a motion calling on my office to conduct an audit of the government's Investing in Canada plan and to report our findings no later than 1 year following the adoption of the motion.
Then,
on March 13th, an order was made by the House of Commons called on my office to conduct an audit of special warrants that could be issued under the Financial Administration Act and to report our findings no later than June the 1st, 2021. We understand that no special warrants have been issued to date. Lastly, on April the 11th, the House of Commons adopted a motion requesting that we conduct an audit of the COVID-19 emergency response taken by the government and to report our findings no later than June the 1st, 2021. On April 28th, we informed the Speaker of the House that we are prioritizing COVID-19 audit work and the audit of Investing in Canada plan. We also said that we will submit our findings to Parliament as soon as we have completed the audit work. Now, with respect to the COVID-19 audit, we have analyzed the specific elements of the audit that the House of Commons requested, including the spending undertaken pursuant to the Public Health Events of National Concern Payments Act and the exercise of the provisions of the Financial Administration Act and the Borrowing Authority Act. The leaders of our performance audit and financial audit practices have been working together to identify the areas that should be covered in our COVID-19 audit work. Of course, we have been monitoring the initiatives that the government has been introducing to respond to the pandemic. As part of our planning work, we have been analyzing spending related to protecting health and safety, support to individuals and businesses, and other liquidity support and capital relief. We also believe that it is important to consider elements of emergency preparedness and early response actions. This may allow us to identify good practices and areas for improvement in case there is a future wave to this pandemic or to be ready for a future pandemic that may arise.
We welcome any input that the committee may have on areas that we could examine as part of our COVID-19 audit work. Since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have recognized that many departments and agencies are on the front line and that they are devoting tremendous amount of time and resources to responding to the pandemic. We are mindful of their operational realities, and we want to make sure that our audit work will not divert their attention away from the support and services they need to provide to Canadians. We will exercise judgment and will strive to be as accommodating as possible when we ask for interviews and documents that are needed for our audit. We have started to engage with senior public servants to explore ways to conduct our audit work while minimizing the impact on the operation of departments and agencies. We are also mindful of the challenges that come with physical distancing measures. Going back to the April 11 order, I will make a few comments about my office resources. The order called on the government to take measures that are necessary to ensure that my office has sufficient resources to conduct the work that we have been asked by the House of Commons to do, including the COVID-19 audit and the audit on the Investing in Canada plan. As members may know, our office has faced resourcing pressure in recent years. In 2017, the former Auditor General, Michael Ferguson, sought permanent additional funding through the government budget process. We received some of the funding that we requested in the 2018 federal budget. We continue to pursue additional resources in the 2019 budget cycle, but did not get any new funding at that time. When we appeared before the Standing Committee on Public Accounts in May and June 2019, and again in February 2020, we told the committee that our limited resources meant that we had no choice but to decrease the number of performance audits that we conduct. 10 years ago, we were completing about 27 performance audits every year. With our current resource, we expect to be able to deliver 14 performance audits each year. Given the nature and extent of the work that we believe is required to conduct the audit of the Investing in Canada plan and the COVID-19 response, and in light of our limited resources, we had to revisit the timing for completing and reporting on our current and future performance audit work. On that basis, we informed the Speaker of the House that we have had to delay all of the performance audit work that is not related to the motions adopted by the House of Commons. Let me be clear, decisions to postpone planned audit work are difficult to make. The topics that we select for our audits are important to parliamentarians and Canadians. Given our limited resources, we did not have the capacity to salvage some of the important audit work that we have now had to postpone. We don't know when we will be able to get to that work. We are ready to answer any question the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ricard. Then we will go to the first round, 6-minute round questions, starting with Mr. Polyev and on to Ms. Zerowitz. Pierre?
So, Mr. Auditor General, are you telling us you've had to delay some of your audits because the government has not given you enough resources to conduct them?
Well, as I mentioned in the opening statement, back in 2017, the former Auditor General, Mr. Ferguson, made a request for $21 million at the time to deal with additional mandates that we had to conduct.
Right.
More complex environment, a need to make significant investments in our technology to have the tool to do data analytic in the new reality out there.
Yeah, I know we're very short on time, sir. I'm asking though, based on your description and your opening statements, do you have enough money to perform the audits that you have before you?
To be sufficiently funded, we signaled to the Public Account Committee that we need $10.8 million.
And what have you got now?
Again, we got out of that 10 million, we got nothing. We got 7 million in 2018 and nothing out of the 10.8 that we've asked in 2019 budget.
So this is a government that is prepared to send billions of dollars around the world to all kinds of causes. But for some reason, the one thing it doesn't want to fund is a a sufficient auditor to hold their spending accountable. And this is at a time when we're doing record spending. This government's going to run a $250 billion deficit, and we don't have a properly funded auditor to look into that spending. I want to turn my attention to the infrastructure program. The government claims it's spending $180 billion on infrastructure, but the parliamentary budget officer points out that they have no plan on how to spend that money. That's why the Conservatives put forward a successfully passed motion that you would audit that plan to find out where all the money is going. Are you going to make sure that your report identifies a list of projects that add up to the total number of infrastructure dollars the government claims to have spent in each year?
Sorry, Mr. Bollier, I'm not sure I heard you. Are you referring to the COVID audit or the infrastructure audit?
Infrastructure.
Yeah, so yes, that is something that obviously we need to do. When we're going to audit that program, we're going to do it at two levels. Overall management of it, the overall coordination of it to the full big picture. And then a second layer of it will address or audit specific elements or components.
When I asked the parliamentary budget officer if he could identify all of the projects that add up to the total the government claims to have spent on infrastructure, he said there is no list of projects that can do that. In other words, we don't know where some of the money has gone. It's sprinkled about in dozens of different departments, and no one can actually attach those dollars to projects and make the two match. So I hope that you will ask them for a full list of projects with their full cost, and the total that should add up to the sum of the parts. Now, on the issue of the COVID-19 spending, do you have enough financial resources to audit the $150 billion plus expenditures that this government is pursuing purportedly in response to COVID-19?
Well, again, as I said earlier, we are clearly having limited resource challenges for years. We're behind. I mean, there's nothing we can do about fixing the investment we should have done over the last few years. So we will have to make difficult choices. It reflects in every area of our office, even our financial statement audit these days. The COVID situation is simply demonstrated times 10, if I can say it that way, the struggle we were living. We had no leeway, no way to adapt to additional requests from the House, no way to invest in technology and get our staff having the tools they need. So the current situation just amplified the challenge we've been facing for years.
And to top it off, the government has kept you in an interim basis for months now, which is a typical governmental tactic used to ensure that they can fire you as soon as you do something they don't like. An interim position means they get rid of you whenever they choose. And that leaves you in a position where you're dependent on them. The Auditor General's position is supposed to be a fixed term of 10 years so that the AG can feel totally independent in the examination and reporting he or she does of government activities. Do you have any comment on why the government would have kept you in a so-called interim position for so long?
I don't know if that really relates to the COVID-19 study that we're doing.
Let him answer the question and stop covering it up. Stop covering it up. Let him answer the question.
Not trying to cover it up, but
let him answer the question
if Mr. Ricard wants to answer the question, I think that's going a little overboard. Mr. Ricard?
Leave that to the people to decide.
So
go ahead, Mr. Ricard.
I'm going to say two things. First, that is a process that belonged to the previous council office, so I don't know the steps where they are and the status of all that, so I can't comment on that part. What I can say, and that is something that I've said in other committee hearings, I want to reassure the committee and Canadians who are listening, watching, interim or not, I will do everything I have to do I'm going to say whatever I have to say to do the job. I'm representing an important institution which is the Office of the Auditor General. So again, interim or not, that is not changing how I'm approaching the work.
Thank you both. Then turning to Ms. Zerowitz and on to Mr. St. Marie. Julie?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank our Auditor General. I want to thank you and your team for your wonderful work and for being here today. And I want to thank you for your extraordinary service to our country, interim or not. We're so grateful to have you. I just want to address very quickly firsthand the resources. According to my notes, the Harper Conservatives had cut $6.5 million and 60 employees from the Auditor General's budget. And I know that our Liberal government, since we've come into office, has tried to commit some additional spending. So I know in budget 2018, we committed more than $41 million in additional funding to the Office of the Attorney General, which is a 16% increase relative to the 2015-2016 fiscal year. Have you not received any of that yet?
So in a nutshell, that can get a very complicated number games here, but back in the strategic review, yes, we've returned on a voluntary basis at the time, I'm going to say 7 million. And since then, what happened in 2017, as I mentioned, the former Auditor General identified that we got to a point where we could not anymore delay some important investments we had over the years to absorb new mandates and so on and so forth, and not having the ability to invest in technology and in important tools. So we got to a point in 2017 so that we could not stand by the level of funding that we were at after the review back in 2011.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that. And I do think it's very important for your office to have sufficient resources to be able to conduct the important work that you have. I want to turn our attention to the motion of April 11th, as you had talked about, in terms of conducting an audit of the spending undertaken and money borrowed due to COVID-19. So my first question is, what period of time will the audit cover? Given that you must report your findings to the House of Commons no later than June 1st, 2021.
So we will start from the first initiatives that were put in place. So we'll start from the beginning, basically, and at some point we will have to make a choice where to draw the line. Maybe another thing I should probably say is, part of the solution may end up being for us to issue interim reports. So it may end up being that we will do some of this work that's in the coming year and a half, and more the year after. And in the meantime, especially in the coming year, we may choose the approach of issuing interim reports if we have enough to bring forward in a relevant way and in a useful way.
And when you say the beginning, do you mean March 15th officially, or the first time we actually have announced a program?
I don't have the exact date here, but I'll give an example. There's a report that the bi-monthly report that is tabled to the committee, and there's the whole list of initiatives there. So we will want to make sure that report include is all inclusive from the very first initiatives. And from what we could see, I think the very first that we could remember of are there. But again, I wouldn't want to be quote on that. An auditor like to have all of his facts straight before speaking. But I'm trying to illustrate that we will identify the very first initiative, and we're going to start from there.
Perfect. And do you think that the audit for the COVID-19, so this motion, will be different than any of the other audits regularly conducted by your office?
Sorry, I had difficulty with the audio.
Oh, it's okay. Sorry. Do you think the audit for the COVID-19 pandemic will be conducted differently from any of the other audits that are regularly conducted by your office?
No. I do, and I guess everybody in the office take pride in the quality of our work. And one of the reasons for the quality and the relevancy of our audit work is because we can rely on very robust way of performing our audit work. So the same basic all-inclusive processes will be adhered to the same way to ensure that we bring forward the same way as in the past quality audit work.
Okay. Now, have you already begun your audit? If so, can you comment on the progress of it and if you've encountered any difficulties thus far?
So I'm going to ask Mr. Hayes to maybe add to this here. But yes, as soon as we saw the motion, we've convened the leaders in the office and started the process. That is an audit where we will want to cover various elements of the initiative or the program, that it be support to individuals, support to businesses, the liquidity aspect, and we could do that also both from a perspective of were those initiatives well managed as a regular audit, but also we will want to make sure, as I said in the opening statement, that we have elements that are more in the terms of the lessons learned and way of improving for future events if that ever happens.
Mr. Hayes, Mr. Hayes, do you want to add to that?
Yes, thank you very much. So we have started our audit work. In the normal course, audit planning can take a number of months, and we're accelerating that right now. We are dealing with the public servants, the senior public servants responsible for the departments that we will have to audit. And we're recognizing, of course, that there are many of them on the front line, and we don't want to distract from the services and support that they're providing to Canadians right now. We're working with them to make sure that we are able to conduct our audit work in a way that doesn't interfere. That said, we are very keen on getting our work going, recognizing that we are going to manage logistical challenges as we go.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Then Mr. St. Marie, followed by Mr. Julian. Gabriel, the floor is yours.
Oui, merci.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I want to say hello to both of you, Mr. Ricard, Mr. Hayes, and I would start with a comment for you, Mr. Chairman. Of course, Mr. Ricard, in your introduction, you made it clear that there is a lack of funding for your office to get all of the work done, and that's a real cause for concern. And Mr. Chairman, I think that the questions raised by Mr. Poliver within this are directly related to COVID, because what we gather is that the Auditor General does not have the means to do all of the auditing that's required for the current crisis. And I think that the questions were absolutely justified. And let us hope that the current government will appoint Mr. Ricard on a permanent basis and not as an interim Auditor General as quickly as possible. My first question for Mr. Ricard is about the Investment Development Corporation of Canada. They will be managing the emergency support for big businesses, and usually they don't manage these government programs. They have assets, Trans Mountain, for instance, General Motors, when that was nationalized, and so on. And in 2018, the Auditor General did an evaluation of an audit of that corporation, and they said that there were possible conflicts of interest within the board. The Auditor General also mentioned that there were weaknesses in the board of directors and the risk surveillance, communications of information, and so on. So is this investment corporation of Canada the right way to manage a government program, to determine who will get support and to make decisions that will be good for society as a whole? Is that part of their mandate, in your opinion? Unfortunately, I can't really comment on that question. That was a decision that was a decision as to the way that the services would be offered, but you're referring to some weaknesses that were raised during a special audit report, I believe, in order to manage the various portions of a program of this size. Of course, we'll have to ensure that the right controls and structures are put into place. And in your opinion, since your report in 2018, in terms of this corporation, have the right changes been made to avoid having these issues come up again? Unfortunately, I can't comment to this. These special audits are something that we do every 10 years according to the law, sometimes more often depending on the context, but it's once every 10 years generally speaking, so we haven't done a follow-up audit since 2018. All right, thank you. So as a comment for the committee, I think that it is quite a cause for concern that this is an area where there are such problems and they're going to manage such a huge support program. There are questions that we'll have to look into. Now, Mr. Ricard, the government has 200 billion in loans and loan guarantees set aside, and we don't know where that will stop. And Parliament can only vote on spending, and all these loans and guarantees will only become an expense once they are cancelled a few years from now, and then it will be too late to control that in any way. Is there some way to have better control over that portion of the activities? Of course, when we undertake to have loans and loan guarantees, that is a risk inherently, and we are going to have to ensure that we have the measures to do that follow-up on these risks that were assumed by the government. And now we're talking about the start of planning and many initiatives, as you understand, and they all will have various impacts, but clearly when you're talking about 200 billion, yes, billions, it's important to have mechanisms created to ensure that we keep a close eye on that risk. So it's important to have mechanisms, but currently you cannot suggest any mechanisms specifically that could be put into place. Well, it all depends. There's transparency, there's in reporting, accountability, reporting, and all of that. But at this point, I don't know enough about the specifics of this initiative to be able to say what the right controls would be. But of course, it's the nature of our work to evaluate the management of various programs. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see that your hand is raised. I have some time left. A little bit? All right, then I'll stop there. My other question was a longer question, and I'll submit it to Alexis and see if he wants to ask that question in the next round. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel. Then turning to Mr. Julian, who will be followed by Mr. Cooper. Peter?
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair, Monsieur Ricard, Mr. Hayes. Thank you very much for being here today. Where we hope that your families are safe and healthy, as well as the entire team at the Auditor General's office. And I must say, I think what is very clear to the Canadian public, seen a lot of finger pointing, the Conservatives pointing the finger at the Liberals, Liberals pointing the finger at the Conservatives for what has been dramatic underfinancing of the functions of the Auditor General. These are extremely important. And the fact that you've actually had to cut your performance audits in half is indicative of a real problem. And both governments, the previous Conservative government and the current Liberal government, share the blame on this. Instead of finger pointing, they should just be acknowledging the errors that have been made in not providing the supports that are so important for your office. Canadians are definitely on your side. You perform an extremely important function, and you need to be financed adequately in order to do that. That's in the interest of all Canadians. So my first question will be around the issue of bailouts. We went through the economic crisis in 2008. Money was being given out. We've seen subsequently to that a lot of loans that became basically written off. And at the beginning of this year, we had $200 million that was written off, a loan to a Canadian company. The government refused to disclose, said that in the interests of commercial confidentiality, they couldn't disclose it, but that all decisions made by Cabinet are in the best interests of Canada. And so $200 million just disappeared in a moment. We saw previously under the Conservative government, similar monies just disappearing. How do we make sure that we are not seeing corporate bailouts, corporate gifts just disappearing when it's not in the public interest? How do we make sure that your office, when it flags these very legitimate concerns about bailouts that are loans that become gifts, how do we ensure that we simply don't see this abuse of the Canadian taxpayer, and that every dollar that's invested is actually used for its intended purposes, and loans given to Canada's most profitable corporations are actually paid back?
Well, one of the things we will look at is to make sure that there's proper, as I was mentioning earlier to your colleague, proper accountability, proper reporting, that there's transparency. That's the key of it. If you don't provide transparent reporting on the initiatives, that's far from being good practice, best practice. You need to disclose your various investments, your various transactions. There's various means. The COVID report, the COVID initiative, the infrastructure program, that it be the broader transaction of the government through the financial statement of the government and the various entities and crown corporation. Proper reporting and transparent reporting is important.
And so this is something that you're asking government to do, but I think it would be important for us to follow the reports that have come out over the years from very respected people such as yourself that actually tell Canadians how government should be structured instead of the secrecy and these special behind the doors agreements, often with lobbyists involved. We need to make sure we're protecting the public person, making sure that every dollar actually counts. And seniors who are struggling to put food on the table, families that are struggling to keep a roof over their head, Canadians that are struggling to keep their jobs should receive the best possible disclosure and transparency around every dollar that's spent. And that hasn't been the case under the previous government, hasn't been the case under the current government, and it definitely needs to change. I want to come to the issue of the use of the Canada account. And particularly, we've been told at the Finance Committee that Trans Mountain, coming out of COVID-19, coming out of the pandemic, that there will be a massive splurging of somewhere around $15 to $20 billion in construction for the Trans Mountain pipeline. That's in addition to the purchase of all the assets that was done basically with no due regard to the public purse. I'm wondering to what extent you're concerned about the use of the Canada account in such an egregious way, basically bypassing Parliament to spend tens of billions of dollars, potentially in this case, for a project that the private sector walked away from because it's simply not anything that it's not a project that has any economic foundation. Are you concerned about the use of the Canada account in this way, in this secretive way?
So again, as I mentioned earlier, it is too early for us to comment on specific transaction, not familiar enough with all of the various elements. What I can say about the Trans Mountain component of it is last year we've issued our first audit report on their financial statements. So we will do that again this year. I would say probably early fall or something like that. But beyond that, at this point, I cannot make any further comments, because I don't have all the details of all of those transactions.
I'm sorry, we'll have to end it there. Thank you both very much. Mr. Cooper, followed by Ms. Koutrakis. Michael, 5-minute round.
Mr. Cooper is. Are you going to go, Michael?
Well, I was going to go.
Fire away.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Unless you want to go. No. Okay.
Mr. Cooper.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to ask. Thank you, Mr. Ricard, for being here. And let me say that in terms of funding for the Auditor General, my questions and comments are in the spirit of seeing that the Auditor General have the full resources that are required, especially in light of the fact that we have a government that has, in the last 2 months, spent more than Canada spent during the Second World War, adjusted for inflation. And when we speak about a $10.8 million increase, that is a rounding error in terms of the federal budget. And I just want to ask Mr. Ricard, you talked about $10.8 million. The context in which that request was made was after your office and its mandate expanded. In other words, you were pre-COVID doing more work, but had no additional resources. Isn't that correct?
Yeah. So over the years, I'll say between 2011 and 2017, when the former Auditor General asked for the additional funding, we had a number of new mandates given to us: the Canada Infrastructure Bank, Trans Mountain Corporation, some museums, some work in the territories, because we can't forget that we're doing audit work, that it be performance audit or financial statement. We're doing that for the 3 territories as well. It's not just the federal government. And there was Federal Sustainable Development Act that made it that while before we had 26 entities to review, it went up to 90. So those are just examples to the mandate component,
Exactly.
But there's other pressure points that we have been living, and it's becoming concerning.
Yeah. And now, in terms of the other audit work, other than the 3 motions put before Parliament, you stated that all other audits are delayed. You said in your testimony that you don't know when your office would have the capacity to undertake work on those audits in terms of getting them completed. Would it be fair to say that that could be as long as past June of 2021, when you're due to report on the COVID spending initiatives?
Well, I'll put it this way: there was obviously some work. For example, we had 3 reports that were due for tabling in late March, but with what happened mid-March with the pandemic, we've put that to the side. So those 3 are ready to be given to the House. But we're referring to any other work that was being done. We had to delay all of that work. Some would have been for this coming fall. As a minimum, it will be spring 21. But beyond that, everything else we had to stop because we simply don't have the capacity. And even with the COVID, there's probably enough there beyond reporting next in a year from now. There's probably enough there for another year worth of work, relevant work. I would think, again, early in our planning stage, but the way we look at this, there's a lot here, and we need to look at that.
So significant delay for a large amount of work before your office, and one of the audits that was in one of the 3 motions passed by Parliament this year concerns the $187 billion infrastructure program. Do you anticipate that that audit will be completed and reported by January of 2021 in light of the the limited resources your office now has, and despite the fact that you are prioritizing the mandate provided by way of the three motions or the audits that have been requested, rather.
So I'm going to ask Mr. Hayes maybe to speak to that one.
Thank you. So to answer the question about the timing of the infrastructure audit, we are working diligently on that audit right now. As Mr. Ricard mentioned, we have prioritized the Investing in Canada plan audit and the COVID audit, and that is the reason why we did delay all of the other work that we had on the forward audit plan. At this point, I would say that we're accepting the fact that departments are dealing with the pandemic crisis, and that in some cases, whether it be our own ability to have staff available because of physical distancing and IT resources, or the actual department's ability to respond to our audit requests, we could see some delays. But like I say, we are working diligently to meet the deadline as much as we can. If there are delays, delays to our tabling plan, we will let Parliament know in due course.
Okay, thank you. We'll end that round there. Ms. Koutrakis next, followed by Mr. Cummings. Annie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your testimony today, Mr. Ricard. I will start with my question to you. I think we'll all agree that during this unprecedented time, many of my constituents and Canadians are reflecting about their own personal finances and well-being, as well as those of the economic future of our country. In your opinion, how will an audit of the government's measures help to address some of these concerns or uncertainties and make Canadians feel confident about the future of our economy?
So thank you for the question. As I mentioned in the opening statement, we want to, as we plan this audit work, we want to look at it from two perspectives. If I refer to the COVID-19 audit, there's various elements. Some of it is to support to individuals. Some of it is to support to businesses. It's important that those various programs to have their impact, that they be well managed, that they will be well planned, well delivered, that somebody's monitoring and adjusting as it's being delivered, and that we report on it. At the same time, we want to have enough audit areas that will be from the perspective of what can be learned from that, from various perspectives. That it be, in case it happen again, that it be from the economic impact that it has, to have the biggest, the biggest or the best impact it can have. You need to learn from the past. So I guess I'm speaking for that way because I'm an auditor, but I like to think that audit is a great vehicle to allow organization to learn and improve, and would like to think that with the work we will do exactly that, help the government improve, and that it will have a better impact on Canadians in the future and in the current and the short term by learning through the audit work we will do.
Thank you for your answer, and thank you for your work. I have one question for Mr. Hayes. I don't know if I pronounced your name accurately. Is it Hayes or Hayes? I'm not sure. But with infrastructure projects being considered as a source post-crisis economic stimulus, can you offer some recommendations around which types of projects would offer the greatest boost to the economy while we're working toward our government's goals of sustainable development and the protection of the environment? I know you don't have details, but I'm sure you must have done some analysis, and perhaps you can recommend some projects.
So at this point, I would say that it would be too early for me to comment on that. Typically with the audit work that we do, we look at the projects that the government has chosen to fund, and we would end up looking at whether the funding has been provided to the recipients that should have gotten it and in the time frames that it should have been issued. You mentioned sustainable development. I would like to just, as interim commissioner of the environment and sustainable development, mention that the sustainable development goals do form part of our audit planning work. And there are a number of sustainable development goals that are at issue when we're looking at the COVID response. Of course, with sustainable development, we have to remember that that's always a balancing of economic, social, and environment. But we are, I guess, planning in a sustainable development context this work.
Okay, and has any analysis been done on the federal government's initiative to clean or reclaim the orphaned oil wells? Can you comment on how this program will work to promote environmental sustainability while providing support to the furloughed workers in the oil and gas sector?
So we do know about the recent investments that have been announced, and that will most likely be a portion of the work that we will look to be doing in this audit.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you all. Turning then Mr. Cumming next, followed by Mr. Fragaskatis. Mr. Cumming.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Ricard, where I'll put my questions to, and thank you for the work that you do. I'm new to Parliament and spent my career in the private sector, and we would always, I think it's misunderstood the role of an auditor, particularly with performance audits, and we would actually welcome performance audits as a source of improvement to operations and to try and get better as a company, which I think is the same thing that should happen with government. My concern here, and it's a head scratcher for me, that to think that we're undertaking this volume of spending and program spending, and to think that we haven't included sufficient capital for the auditor to do their job and make sure that the taxpayers' dollars have been spent well, and particularly to your comments about ensuring that if we got into a situation like this again, that we would understand better whether these programs work or not. For you as a career auditor, it must strike you that, as someone said, it's a rounding error. I can't understand for the life of me. Forget about the past. We're in here today, $200 billion worth of spending. Surely we should have a more comprehensive audits at this time.
I guess all what I can say is been attending Public Account Committee with former Auditor General Mr. Ferguson, and then by myself with other colleagues as an interim, being loud and clear. The former Public Account Committee in this legacy report and in the letter to some key players in the federal system had a unanimous position on the fact that we should get the additional funding. I don't know what more I can say about that aside from saying that I'm for the institution, the important institution that the Office of the Auditor General is. It's concerning. We're even these days having challenges to deliver our financial statement audit work. Again, the context make it so. It just demonstrates the challenges we've been facing for years, and that we have no flexibility, no leeway. And as soon as something happens, we have to make difficult choices.
Well, thank you for that. On your audit related to the COVID spending, the emergency spending, will it include, and I suspect it will, is the efficacy of the programs that were put in place? Because many of them have cliffs where they're based upon revenues of companies, and the revenues falling or gaining, and people could stop getting the subsidy or they continue getting the subsidy. And what kind of depth will you be able to go to make sure that the programs are doing what they're intended to do?
So difficult again, as I mentioned earlier, we're still somewhat early in the plan to decide which program we will choose. let's say for this year, and maybe we'll decide that there's enough for the following year. And then for those programs, what's the angle and the scope the criteria we will use for the audit. But as a minimum, we're there to make sure that overall the program is well managed, well delivered. So obviously, we want to make sure that there were some good planning done. The information decisions were based on information. So when you refer to criteria, that organization have to meet some test or meet some condition to have access to it, we will want as a minimum to make sure that the departments have in place all the means to confirm that and monitor that and deal with any adjustment if there is a need for any adjustment in the conditions going forward, and or to follow up with the organization if they don't meet the conditions and that they're not supposed to have access to the funding.
You had mentioned that you have 3 audits that are complete and they're ready to go, except Parliament's not sitting in its normal fashion. What are those 3 audits that are ready to go?
Well, those are, we had to inform Parliament that through the Speaker, mid-March, that given the condition that we could not table our reports on supplying the Canadian Armed Force, immigration removals, and student financial assistance. So again, those 3 are ready to be tabled. Whenever the Public Account Committee come back, we will reach out to them and see what's the way forward. Obviously, in light of the current circumstance, we'll have to reflect on does that have any impact on any of those 3 audits. But we'll take it from there based on discussion with the Public Account Committee. But those, again, were 3 that we were to table. I think it was March 24th was the date.
Okay, thank you all. Mr. Fragascatis, and then we'll be going to a fairly quick round by Mr. Brunel de Sepp. Peter?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the Auditor General and to Mr. Hayes for appearing today. Mr. Chair, it could come as a shock to you, but the newfound interest that Conservative colleagues have in the work of the Auditor General could be questioned for its sincerity. The Harper government, after all, cut $6.5 million from the budget of the AG and 60 employees from the AG's budget. This federal Liberal government restored that funding. But I think it's important to put on the record, because if we're going to be consistent in recognizing the respect of the work that is completed by the Auditor General, and I think it is very important work, to be clear, then we have to be certain about what past governments have done, and from there we can judge the sincerity of particular questions. But I don't want to digress too much. To Mr. Ricard. Could you give us an idea of the work that was done by the Auditor General's office during the time of the post-2008 financial crisis, and the sort of questions that the office examined at that time?
Sorry, I don't think I have much to say, except that maybe the one that come to mind, and what my point is, maybe there are others, and I'll ask Mr. Hayes maybe to expand on it, is we've done an audit of the initiative that was put in place way back then to invest in various areas in the country. So I don't know if Mr. Hayes want to expand on that one.
Yeah, and before you do, Mr. Hayes, just to be clear, I asked the question as a way of understanding certain questions that are asked then, which could be applied to studying the situation now and in the coming months as a post-recovery economic plan begins to, well, it's already unfolding, but this is something that's going to be with us for some time. So applying what we saw the AG's office do at that time, and seeing whether or not the same sorts of issues could be examined or not, because this is obviously a very different downturn in shape and form, and comparing and contrasting, I think, is useful.
Thank you. Yes, so indeed, the economic action plan work that we did in 2009 and 10 is probably the most instructive at this point. So just a brief history, in March 2009, then Auditor General Sheila Fraser wrote to the Secretary of the Treasury Board to discuss what expectations we would have as an office, including coordination and integration both within the federal government and with provincial governments, effective management and control over spending. Ms. Fraser noted the importance of establishing a high-level oversight committee that could help to steer programs and adapt to situations that may come up. We delivered our first report on the Economic Action Plan in fall 2010, and that was, I suppose it's similar to the situation we're in now, where we were auditing in real time. And what we looked at that point were whether the programs and processes were designed and streamlined in a way that would allow the government to act quickly to get funds out where they needed to be. We looked at eligibility criteria and whether early funding was based on eligibility criteria, whether central agencies paid attention to risk and mitigated those risks, and whether the government met its quarterly reporting requirements. In the second Economic Action Plan audit report that we delivered in the fall of 2011, we talked about the government's monitoring of progress and the spending, and we identified some opportunities for better performance measurement and reporting. So I think looking back at those audits, that would be probably the most instructive for this current.
Mr. Hayes, are there lessons learned from that experience that that this federal government could keep in mind when it comes to the planning that's already taking shape, in fact, when it comes to the economic recovery that we're going to see in the next few months and perhaps in the next few years?
So right off the bat, I think we have been clear. We've written to the government early on to say that while we recognize they need to move quickly, it's important to ensure that decisions, rationales, and processes are properly documented. Of course, we're going to be looking at the same ideas in terms of financial management, control, eligibility, and reporting and transparency is obviously a very important theme that we will be looking at as well.
Okay, we will have to end it there, folks. Thank you for that round. We'll go to 2.5 minute rounds for the next two questions. Mr. Brunel Duceppe, followed by Mr. Julian. Alexis.
Thank you, Chair. My question is for Mr. Hayes. In the context of COVID, we know that the purse strings have been loosened, but there's something that I find paradoxical about it, and I'd like to hear what you have to say. In 2009, Canada, like the other countries in the G20, eliminated unnecessary expenses, looked at fossil fuels in Alberta, and there were billions that were moved around Trans Mountain and elsewhere. But we know that the oil industry is now facing enormous difficulty. Shouldn't that be a signal for the government to stop investing in that sector? Shouldn't it be promoting other forms of energy in Alberta that don't involve oil? To begin, I would say that it's important that this audit of the fossil fuels, it's important to understand that it was a commitment that the government undertook to eliminate inefficient subsidies. And I would say that the work that we did served the purpose, but it wasn't a policy of the government. Mr. Ricard, do you want to add anything? But I do have a question for Mr. Ricard. I'm happy with your answer. The Governor General audits after the fact. But what parliamentarians need now is someone to look at these extraordinary programs to ensure that controls are being exercised. Would your office be able to do real-time audits to raise a red flag if necessary, instead of doing an after-the-fact audit? Yes, we do audit in real time, and our experience with this is attached to the 2008-2009 Economic Action Plan, for example. It is possible for our office to make interim reports, not just at the end. We don't have to wait to the end of the process to table a report. Yes, we're just beginning, right now. We're planning. We're contacting the organizations to see how we're going to be working, and we're learning things that have to be brought up at a timely moment to have the best, broadest report. And this is something that is certainly quite possible. It can be done. Thank you very much, sir.
Turning then to Mr. Julian, and first up in the next round will be Mr. Morantz. Pierre?
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. My question is for Mr. Ricard. Now, when I look at the reports that the Auditor General's Office has published, has released for years, you ask for transparency with respect to web giants and also tax havens. And in fact, there are tens of billions of dollars that have left Canada because of these things. How can we have a fairer system, do you think? A system so that these ultra-rich web giants that use tax havens, these enormous businesses that have enormous profits and take their profits out of the country to evade taxes, how in the context of COVID-19 can we do something so that it won't happen again in the future, so that these resources can stay here and be invested in ways that we can get out of the economic crisis?
I'd like to start my answer by saying that there's an important audit to be carried out just on this very topic, and I'm not sure to what degree within the current audits about COVID and infrastructure we'll be able to get into that level of detail. But clearly, these are areas where we expect CRA, among others, to play its role in ensuring that everything is done according to the rules based on the current fiscal legislation. And you know that I won't comment on fiscal legislation because that's political decision. But once a law is set for taxes in Canada, then people who have a role in that should ensure that the entirety of the Act is protected and that everyone plays their role. Now, I can't undertake at this point, given how vast and complex a subject this is, I can't confirm that this is something we're going to look at in a thorough manner in the current context, but of course it's important.
Thank you both, Mr. Morantz and then Mr. Fraser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have to say, very interesting discussion on, not just as an MP, but as just a Canadian citizen. I have to say, Mr. Ricard, I am alarmed by what you told the committee today. And I think it's very sad, and certainly I think the government should be ashamed that you have to come to committee to make your case just to do your job. The function of the auditor is a fundamental check and balance in our system, particularly when we're embarking on massive programs like this in order to deal with the crisis. My question really is around this. Just yesterday, and I think that my preamble informs the question. There was a news report of the National Post saying that public servants are being directed, if this story is true, to ignore claims of fraud, and that there are 200,000 files that have been red flagged. I was wondering if you could comment on this, if you have concerns about the accountability in these programs. I know one of the checks and balances in the program was supposed to be you, but apparently you may not have the funds to actually be in that role. So I wonder if you could comment on whether you think the checks and balances in the current emergency programs are sufficient or not.
Well, I cannot. I'll ask Mr. Hayes if he has anything he want to add to this, but at this point, obviously, I cannot comment on the status of the check and balance, the controls, because we haven't been out there doing the actual work. We are currently planning the audit work, but in regard to what you're referring to, that is the type of those are the type of elements that we've covered in other audits. Let's say we've done audits in the past on payments of employment insurance benefits. Well, there's two sides to it: the payment going out to the right people and that meet the condition, and then once it's not the case, what's being done by the organization to monitor that side of it and recover the amounts that have to be recovered. So again, I don't know if Mr. Hayes wants to add to this.
So I will add a little bit just to say that fraud risks are always part of our planning process. And when there are potential for error in these kind of programs, we will look for that in our audit work. Mr. Ricard was I think referring in part to an audit of EI overpayments that we reported to Parliament in 2013. And one of the things that we mentioned at that time was that while the department had to balance the need to get money out, it also needed to make sure that it was done accurately. And in a time of speed, right now, it's going to be important for us to look at the way that the government is going to recover any errors.
And just one follow-up, Mr. Chair. Thank you. And to Mr. Ricard, it just seems rather dramatic to me that you need to come here and make your case, and I really feel awful for you, because really this shouldn't even be a question that your office is properly funded, and I don't know how I'm going to explain this to my constituents. But I am curious if you can comment on whether, when you were turned down in the budget process in 19, whether your office made any other overtures and asks to government officials for further funding, and were also rebuffed. If you could comment on that, Mr. Ricard, that would be great.
You referred to 2019?
Yes. You said earlier that you were turned down in 2019 for the $10 million. Since then, have you had any other discussions with government about your funding?
No, okay, I guess I'll answer in two parts. No, not in a formal way, because as you know, there's no budget that I know anyway that has been announced in terms of timeline or whatever. But we've been, I guess, talking to some players at I'll say at some levels, working level, like normal process that take place. But we haven't got any answer or any positive outcome out of that. And as I said earlier, I am really getting concerned about the impact this has on this institution. I want to be clear. I had no choice but to mention this to the committee in light of being clear in terms of expectation of the committee and parliamentarians. If I'm not transparent about this reality, I'm not doing anybody any service, right? I have to be transparent. If we suggest to organization that they have to speak speak to in a transparent way and the full way, it has to start with us. So we've always done it that way, and we believe in that.
I'll just say, sir, today you've done a great service for your country by telling us your story. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both, and thank you, Marty. We'll go to Mr. Fraser, and then we'll follow up with a question from Miss May, and we told the Auditor General 90 minutes, and that will probably sum it up. Mr. Fraser.
Thank you very much, and thank you for joining us today. I wanted to ask a little bit about best practices when it comes to the storage and disclosure of data. It seems to me as though we're going through what was perhaps by no one's design a very interesting economic and social experiment in order to respond to this crisis. There's probably categories of data that we may not ordinarily keep in terms of both the way money is spent, but importantly, the impact that it's actually having as well. Do you have recommendations or advice for the committee or the government that would allow us to achieve best practices when it comes to keeping as much data as we can for consideration on the back end of the rollout of some of these policies?
I'll ask Mr. Hayes to speak to this.
Yes, so data has been a constant theme for our audit work over the last number of years, and the importance of good data to support decision making is paramount and critical to having best results for Canadians from our perspective anyways. So obviously we recognize, and the Secretary of the Treasury Board has been clear with departments that it's important to move quickly, but to ensure that decisions and rationales are documented. So we would start there, and we would hope that that data is captured. I would note, of course, that there may be other kinds of data that is being collected, and the Privacy Commissioner may have views on that collection, use, and disclosure. I think particularly about health information that might be collected and that sort of thing. So we would hope that personal information that should be protected is being protected to the degree possible. The other thing I will mention is obviously secret information, cabinet confidence information is a challenge in the current environment. So security protocols are always important in terms of handling that data.
Can you point us to any perhaps international comparator or some institutional organization that actually could shed light on how we can put record-keeping practices in place? I'm thinking to myself, it's frustrating on occasion when you try to dig into historical job numbers and realize that we didn't even keep track of some of these modern statistics until the mid-70s. Are there things we can learn through this experience, categories of data that we don't normally keep that would make your work easier and more importantly, improve the decision-making process for governments in the future?
So I think I'll answer that one. I don't have any blinding insights for you right now. It might be something that our audit teams can look into, and if we can get back to you with some ideas, we will.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I don't have too many questions, but I do like to sort of tee it up for the witnesses on occasion. To our Auditor General, if there is one takeaway from your time here today that you would like the committee to hold after your testimony is complete, what is it that you really hope sticks with us all that will allow you to most effectively do your work?
Well, I guess I'll say that we will, as usual, provide parliamentarians with top quality audit work. We will do our best to provide timely information, so maybe not just one report or reports in a year, maybe there'll be interim reporting. And thanking the opportunity for the committee to have this hearing today. At the end of the day, through all of this, both for us and for departments, there is something that is becoming clear through that the pandemic is the importance of technology, IT system to be up to date, both from us on other tools and from departments, and the capacity for Canadians to have access to service of government, especially in remote area. That is an area that will be of importance for us probably when we will do the audit of COVID and or infrastructure because we are also living it from an auditor's perspective. So we do believe that that's one place where we could make a difference for Canadians.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Those are my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you all, Ms. May.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is to our Interim Commissioner on Environment and Sustainable Development, Mr. Hayes. I think you're coming up now. By July, you'll have been interim for a full year. I know a lot of Canadians don't always know that when they hear the reports from the Commissioner for Environment and Sustainable Development, that it's a position within the Office of the Auditor General. So I wanted to know from you whether the financial limitations and budget limitations that we've heard about from the Auditor General equally impact our ability to, for instance, audit progress towards sustainable development goals.
Thank you. Yes. So the work that is done on environmental and sustainable development matters within the Office of the Auditor General is part of the performance audit practice. So the reduction in the funding available for performance audits has a consequential effect on the audits that I can deliver as interim commissioner. As a matter of scale, in the past, we would on average do about 6 per year. We expect with the new realities that we're facing with our funding that we're down to 4. That said, we are obviously trying our best to ensure that sustainable development goals are incorporated into a lot of the work that the Auditor General does as well.
Okay,
Mr. Chair,
yes, go ahead.
I'm allowed to just add something.
Add to it, Mr.
Just very, very briefly, just to add to that that storyline, it also impacts our capacity to do audit work in the territories. And when we look at past work and or future work on territories, and we're talking about mental health, correction services, child and family services. Again, when I said earlier that I was getting concerned in our capacity to make a difference for Canadians, those are obvious examples that come to mind.
Okay, thank you. I thank you for providing us the valuable information you have today and appearing before this committee. I know it's more traditional public accounts, but I will say from a personal point of view, not just the audit that you do as Auditor General, a number of Auditor Generals have done, but what I really find as really an education is when you do an audit, you kind of sum up what happens within that area that you're doing the audit on. And that's that for me personally, and I've been an MP for quite a little while, I find that personally very valuable in understanding the various tasks that a department takes on and the services that they provide or don't quite provide as well as they're supposed to according to the Auditor General. So I want to thank both of you very much for appearing before the committee today. I think you have provided us with some valuable insight, and we appreciate your constructive analysis. For committee members, we have the meeting with the Minister and officials on Thursday. Next week, we've been informed by the Whip's office now that we will be meeting on Tuesday and Thursday next week. We will have a general panel on Tuesday rather, as well as the CEO of the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. And Minister Ng has agreed to appear for an hour on the Thursday. That was your request, I believe, Marty. So she will be appearing on Thursday, and we'll also have a general panel there as well. I would remind members that there is about 74 witnesses left on the list of requests to appear. If the various parties could have their witness list to the clerk no later than 6 o'clock Wednesday, that's tomorrow night. If you can go through that list or add another one to it if you decide. then have your witnesses to the clerk by tomorrow night at 6, so he can and his staff can get on the phone to get that job done and give witnesses plenty of time. With that, I want to again thank the witnesses and thank the committee members for their efforts today. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.